evening, we give you thanks for the gifts that we have been given and the beautiful community that we live in. Help us make wise and thoughtful decisions that are in the best interest of the citizens of Canby. In your name, amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So I want to thank everybody that is in attendance this evening. Appreciate you coming out on such a beautiful evening. So first thing is citizen input on non-agenda items. Is there anybody that has anything they would like to talk about that is not on our agenda? Okay. Approval of the minutes, Planning Commission minutes for August 12th, 2019. Never had a chance to read those. I will entertain a motion for approval.
Mr. Chair, I'll motion to approve.
Have a second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Ryan, do we have any new business?
There is none.
Okay. So we have two things to consider this evening. First is to consider site and design review and a conditional use permit and variance applications for a 130-foot tall stealth monopole telecommunications tower with antenna. The pole would be designed to resemble a fir tree and be located at 640 Southwest 2nd Avenue. City file number DR 19-01/CUP 19-01/VAR 1902. The matter before the hearing body requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matter. If you wish to testify on this matter, please fill out the public testimony card and give it to the recording secretary. At the appropriate time when your name is called, please step forward to the microphone, state your name, address, and interest in the matter. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In so doing, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. You may be limited by time for your presentation. Generally, the applicant will have a total of 15 minutes to speak. The proponents will be given 5 minutes each, the opponents will be given 5 minutes each, and those thought to be neutral on the matter will be given 5 minutes each. The applicant will then have 10 minutes for rebuttal. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access and to become a part of the record. All written testimony received both for and against prior to the hearing shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. Testimony and evidence must be directed toward the applicable review criteria contained as indicated by the staff report, the comprehensive plan, or the applicable land use regulations which the person believes to apply to the decision. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision maker and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government to respond to the issue may preclude an action for damages in circuit court. Everyone present is encouraged to testify, even if it is only to concur with previous testimony. At this time, I would ask that any member of the hearing body who has a conflict of interest to please indicate the nature and extent of the conflict and whether you intend to participate in or abstain from hearing the present matter.
Mr. Chair, I work for a local telecommunications company in town, but I don't think it will reflect on my vote, and I do plan on being a part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Just an abundance of caution, I've had AT&T service since 2003 with Singular and then back to AT&T. I don't think it's going to affect my vote today, but I wanted to disclose it.
Okay, thank you. Also, if any member of the hearing body has had any ex parte contact with anyone prior to this hearing, including a visit to the site, please declare the nature and extent of such contact at this time. Okay. Does any member of the audience have any questions for any commissioner regarding conflict of interest or ex parte contact? Okay. So we'll move ahead. The public hearing will be conducted as follows. First, we'll have the staff report, and that will be, right, okay. Then we will open for public hearing. The applicant will have not more than 15 minutes. The proponents not more than 5 minutes. Opponents not more than 5 minutes. Neutral not more than 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes of rebuttal by the applicant. That time we'll close the public testimony, and we will have questions among us and discussion and deliberation. No additional testimony unless specifically allowed by the chair. A decision will be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing, or the matter will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
All right, thank you, Chair Sabrine. So tonight I will be summarizing the staff report, which includes a brief description of the project, our findings, and then our recommendation for the project. So this slide is just a reminder that staff evaluated these applications with the criteria that are found in the Canby Municipal Code. And this particular item includes 3 applications that are interrelated. The first is the site and design review, just because it's a project in in one of our industrial areas. It requires a conditional use permit just because of the nature of the project based on the code and where it's located and the height. And then a major variance is required based on the height and the setbacks, and I'll get to that once I describe the project. So the existing site is a almost 1 acre site between 2nd Avenue and 99E in the southwestern part of town. It's an existing Pacific Pride fueling station. And this parcel and the surrounding parcels are mostly developed with urbanized land uses. And it is on this parcel, it has split zoning, so you can see it's the outline in blue on the screen is the parcel, but this portion of the parcel is zone CM, which is heavy commercial manufacturing. This is an aerial photo of the proposed location. You can see that on the lower left is Canby High School, or the corner of the property, and McDonald's. Up in the upper right is Dairy Queen and US Bank, and then to the far right is the beginning of residential neighborhoods, and then 99E travels in a diagonal direction towards downtown. So the proposed facility, as Chair Savory said, is a 130-foot stealth monopole telecommunications facility. 124 feet of that is the actual telecommunications facility, and an additional 6 feet is additional height for branches and the conical shape to make it look like a tree. And this facility is meant to fill in gaps of service for data and telephone service that the applicant has determined is deficient, it's underserved, and so they're trying to fill in a gap. The facility is designed to look like a Douglas fir tree, so it'll have faux branches and it'll be painted to look like a tree, as you'll see on the following slides. The leasing area would be a 25 by 30 piece of the existing parcel, so that the existing fueling station would stay as it is and would continue operating as it is under existing conditions. In addition to the pole, there would be an equipment shelter with an indoor generator, a perimeter fence around it with privacy slats, and a landscaping buffer facing Second Avenue that would have some shrubs in front of it. Because Second Avenue is the street where you can actually see the ground level infrastructure that would be in the leasing area. So this is a proposed rendering of what the facility would look like. You can see that it is designed to resemble a tree. At the bottom is the privacy fencing and the equipment shelter. And then on the site plan on the left, you can see that there's some planned landscaping in front of it. The applicant has provided 6 different view simulations to show what it would look like. So each one of these is existing conditions and then with the proposed facility. These first 2 views are from Second Avenue, so you can see the first one is really up close, directly in front of it. It's obviously very visually prominent. You pull back a little bit down Second Avenue and you can see that there does seem to be some other trees that kind of hide it a little bit. The next 2, number 3 is down near McDonald's, so you're looking in a northeast direction towards the site. You can see the shape sort of mimics some of the other trees that are beyond it in the distance. View 4 is from 99E, so it's kind of looking south towards the facility. And then these last 2 are from the highway. So one is as you're leaving town, heading towards Aurora, and then the number 6 is as you're coming into town. And so on the bottom you can see, if you're heading south, it's a little more obscured by surrounding trees and other infrastructure, and then as you're heading northeast, it's a little more prominent as it stands out above McDonald's. So the applicant chose this site based on a targeted search ring. So they did a lot of research into where signal strength and their capacity is reaching a limit, and they could probably speak to this a lot more. So this was the targeted area where they're trying to increase service. And then this map, which I'm assuming the applicant can also speak to a little bit more, is the additional service that this facility would bring. So the green is where there's already good AT&T service, and then the yellow would be an expansion of that coverage and capacity. So when staff evaluated these applications, as I noted before, there's a wealth of criteria found in the code. The one in bold is actually the most detailed, more detailed than a lot of criteria for other kinds of development in town, and that's criteria specifically related to siting and review of wireless telecommunications facilities. So firstly, there's conditional use permit criteria. Is it consistent with our comprehensive plan and the characteristics of the site? The staff report determined that it was. It's land zoned for industrial uses. It's relatively far from residential uses. Is there adequate public facilities to serve the project? There is. It's in a developed area. And would it preclude or limit surrounding uses? And the answer to that is no. The existing uses around it would be able to continue to exist, and there's nothing about this facility that would preclude the other light industrial and highway commercial parcels nearby from developing in the future. So there's additional criteria for siting of wireless facilities. There's really robust submittal requirements, so the applicant has provided a long list of requirements so that we can evaluate the project. There's criteria related to lot size and coverage that this project wouldn't really affect, since it's just a small leasing area on a larger parcel. It would comply with the landscaping and screening requirements. It's not proposed to have lighting, so it wouldn't really create any light overspill into adjacent neighborhoods. and it's not in a sensitive location, and those are listed in the criteria, so areas that have a natural habitat or something like that. And you'll see the one that has some blue text bolded is there are height and setback requirements based on where the facility is, based on the zone, the height, and a categorization of preferred, acceptable, or conditionally suitable parcels within town. And the variance that's required for this particular site and facility the requirement is a 1-to-1 setback. So however tall the facility is, it's required to have an equal setback. So in this case, it's a 130-foot tall tower, so ideally it would have a 130-foot setback. In this case, there's property lines surrounding the parcel that it would be located on. So these are approximately 73, 50, and down to 13 and a half feet at the closest, because there are a lot of smaller parcels in this area. This graphic shows the 130-foot radius around the pole itself. And so you can see the dashed lines are property lines. So it would, the setback of 130 feet does intersect with multiple property lines. So there are additional criteria having to do with a major variance, which is what this project would require to be approved. And these really revolve around, are there exceptional or extraordinary circumstances that would not allow a facility to be built on this compared to other sites. And what the applicant's materials prove, and we've done our own study and have confirmed, is that in this area of town, which is the area of town that the applicant is looking to serve, there really are no sites that would allow a proposed facility that would be tall enough to serve the unmet need, to actually have that full setback. So the circumstances are that a variance is required because we would really be prohibiting a cell tower of this size in anywhere in this area where it would actually be allowed in acceptable or preferred sites. So if the Planning Commission agrees with our recommendation, we've included some conditions of approval that would be placed on the facility. And there's 15, but I've just highlighted the ones that are specific to the design and its nature as a cell phone tower. And these are just paraphrased. The conditions are actually longer, as you've seen in the staff report. But conditions 6 and 7 have to do with how it would actually be designed to be realistically resemble a tree. You know, if you do a Google search for cell phone towers that are stealth mono fir, there are some that look quite fake. So these conditions are meant to guide the design so that the spacing of the branches and the look of the branches and the painting of it and where the branches begin going upward on the pole are meant to actually resemble a realistic looking tree. We've also included a condition because of the reduced setback that the facility would have a breakpoint technology, which is basically in the really unlikely event that there was structural failure of the monopole, rather than completely collapsing the full height of it, it would break at an intermediate part up the pole so that it would just collapse on itself. And this would reduce significantly the radius of which the facility would fall in the very unlikely event that would happen. And this is a requirement that many cities condition similar facilities to be designed like in their cities. And then lastly, condition 10 requires a maintenance agreement because we obviously want this facility to be kept in working order and maintained so that it isn't unsightly in a part of our community that obviously you can see coming in and out of Canby. And it's also, the maintenance agreement also addresses the landscaping that would be in front of it, because obviously we want someone to be coming back and making sure that that screening landscaping is hiding the equipment shelter that's behind it. I wanted to note that we've received 4 items of correspondence related to this item. We received letters from the consulting city engineer and ODOT, both saying that they had no comments. We received one article that was brought in by a resident that expresses concerns about 5G technology. I think the applicant could probably talk about the technology more when they come up. But my understanding, this facility is for 4G technology. So I think the concerns identified in that article probably are not applicable. And then this morning Sunday we got another email with a concern about the visual impact of the facility. This person said that she thought it would be ugly and that we didn't need another vertical, prominent something in town. So based on the findings in the staff report, staff has recommended that the joint applications of the design review application, the conditional use application, and the major variance be approved. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions?
I have a few. One, by approving this with a major variance, is that opening us up to having to have more poles if people want them?
I don't think so necessarily I don't necessarily think it's a precedent setting.
No, especially with the conditional use and all, I mean, everything is based upon this location, the tower and its nature that's being proposed. There's no precedent setting with this request.
Not going to have the forest of monopoles.
And something I should have mentioned when I talked about the exceptional circumstances of this area of town versus other parts of town. Obviously, we have a lot of industrial land in the Pioneer Industrial Park, and there are much larger parcels there. So the variance is also kind of remedying that disparity, is that a property owner could more easily accommodate the setback in a different part of town.
Okay. And you said that there's going to be breakpoint technology. Is it one breakpoint or several? I mean, is it going to?
Yes, the way I've seen it's one breakpoint. So the lower parts of the pole are designed to be stronger, and then the upper parts are a lighter steel construction, so that the upper part will just fall down onto the lower part.
Okay. And falling down like that, is there any issue with it being so close to the fuel station?
I don't believe so. This condition isn't meant to imply that we think it's going to fall down.
No.
Obviously, if a pole fell on anything, it would cause a problem. This is just an abundance of caution because it is a taller facility.
Okay. That's all I have.
Right?
Is there's some mention of the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996, I think it is. Is there, in your view, I read through that today, do we have an option under that law but to approve this? And if so, where do we get that option?
I think consistency with that federal legislation, it does make it hard for local jurisdictions to deny a project such as this. It adds a lot of restrictions on a local jurisdiction's ability to regulate these kinds of facilities. That involves how much fees can be paid, the timing. For instance, this particular kind of telecommunications facility, there's actually a shot clock based on that telecommunications law of 150 days. So we're actually 52 days into it right now. So we have to resolve all the decisions and appeals within that 150 days. Many jurisdictions that have seen these kinds of facilities, the case law is materially inhibiting it, is basically prohibiting it
There's
under
no
the
case,
law.
there's no case law in the Ninth Circuit on that, right? It's all outside of our circuit, and there's nothing in the Supreme Court.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But all the legal guidance that I've seen has said that
I guess my question, I don't mean to get sidetracked, but
Sorry.
is it the staff's position that the commission has no choice under federal law but to approve this?
I'm not.
I think his first answer was most correct. We wouldn't say that, no, you don't have the choice to deny it, but you need to provide some pretty good findings to go along with that. And it's, I think what Ryan indicated is, it is risky. And that's what staff's recommendation is saying, is not that we absolutely love cell towers, although they did volunteer a fir tree, which I think is better than not having a fir tree. But that's aesthetics, that's up to opinions.
No
But-
giant dahlias?
But yeah, on balance, you ask us to provide you a professional recommendation, and in the interest of providing good cellular service within the community, as most of these companies are trying to do for a profit, but yet all citizens want their cell service, and they've demonstrated that there's a gap, and they can't really put their tower in the industrial park where there's larger tracks. So because of that, we think it's reasonable to approve the variance, and I think that's where the weakest link is their setback and the variance.
All right.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. How far from the gas pumps is the tower?
I think it's about maybe about 50 feet or so.
Seems pretty close to me for something that might fall over.
That's 130 feet tall. Any other questions? Okay, at this time, we'd like to hear from the proponent. If you could state your name and address.
Are we on? There you go. Thanks. Good evening. My name is Sharon Gretsch. I am from SmartLink. My address, our corporate address is 14110 Northeast 122nd Way, Suite 101, 102, correction, Kirkland, Washington. And I have with me my cohort here, Chip O'Hearn.
Yeah, I'm Chip O'Hearn. I'm a real estate manager with SmartLink, working on behalf of AT&T in the area of site acquisition, and she covers the other side of it for land use.
I tried to anyway.
And your address, please.
Oh, it's,
Oh, is it the same?
yep.
It's the same address.
Yeah.
Okay,
Same address.
all righty.
So I did want to start out, first and foremost, by saying thank you to staff for working with us on this application. It's been a real challenge, given the the search ring in the area that we were covering, trying to find a reasonable solution that would work for both the city and for AT&T. Staff has been incredibly patient with hundreds of questions, so I wanted to thank them first and foremost. As far as the project goes, Ryan did a great job explaining what we're doing. We are upgrading our wireless service for AT&T for 4G. Part of this network upgrade, we're proposing to build this facility. You'll have to forgive me, I'm always nervous the first 5 minutes or so. I'll settle down. And our site is called PW34 Canby High School and located at 640 Southwest 2nd Avenue. As Ryan mentioned, the site is proposed to is for service coverage and capacity. That means there is a service gap, and our site itself has hit a capacity, or it will work to infill a capacity issue that we're having with adjacent sites. That being said, the adjacent sites are quickly being overloaded. Every cell site is finite, and the sites surrounding it are approaching maximum capacity. So this is a capacity site to help with that. The tower itself, again, 130-foot cell tower. Let's see if I can flip back your computer, right? Did I go the wrong way?
Yes.
Okay, I'll get it. I wanted to go back to the photo sims. Again, it's 130-foot stealth mono fir. I keep saying monopine, and that's not right. Stealth mono fir. It's 120-foot monopole with 124 feet to the antenna tip height. That additional 6 feet is simply so that we can create a more natural taper to the pole or to the tree itself, so that it will cover the antennas completely, so that you won't see the antennas. The antennas will be painted a green color to match that. The pole itself will be painted brown. The tower itself is going to be engineered, obviously, and it'll meet all building code standards as required. Trying to hit my... we are proposing the breakpoint technology to attempt to address the setback issue, and that, I think I heard the question, where is that going to happen at? And I think at this point we were thinking at about the 60-foot level, so that it would collapse around 60 feet, and that would keep it from coming towards 2nd Avenue, right? And it should be of a distance far enough from the tanks.
And the pumps.
And the pumps, yeah. Again, we'll be doing some landscaping per code, and I wanted to go to talk a little bit. I'm going the wrong way. Trying to find our coverage maps. There we go. So typically what happens for us is we're issued a targeted search ring by AT&T to meet a coverage and capacity issue that they have identified through multiple means. This is a particular search ring that we were issued a year and a half ago? About a year ago. So it's taken us a while to get here. During that time, we, as soon as this came out, Chip went out, boots on the ground, looking for a location to meet our clients' needs and that met code requirements for the city. He talked to multiple people, and at the end of the day, this was the site that best met our coverage objectives, and had a willing landlord. Willing landlords play a big part in us siding locations. So the coverage that you see there, everything in yellow is our coverage gap. That is the area that is not currently being covered. There are some other maps that are associated with this that show also the capacity areas that we're picking up. You'll see the blue dots. Each of those are an existing site, and those are the sites that this particular tower is meant to offload. So again, this covers two different things. It's covering that gap in coverage and the capacity issue. What am I forgetting?
Nothing.
Oh, God,
You're
it's
right
got to
on.
be a first.
Nope.
Just checking my notes. One of the key points for siting a new facility is to make sure that it is located in an area that is central to the area that we are trying to cover. I was trying to think of a good analogy, and because I'm nervous, it has all gone. But, so it needs to be centrally located so that it can cover for those blue dots and hand off to the adjacent sites so we get that smooth, seamless coverage.
Excuse me.
And let's talk a bit about the alternative sites, if you don't mind.
Yeah, they, oftentimes when I'm going out and searching, when they give me that search ring in particular, it's pretty small. And I tend to always, even though it's very small, I tend to canvas kind of around that search ring too, looking for the most viable properties that could actually hold the cell tower. So I did go outside the search ring itself, and there were only two other interested parties or property owners that were interested in entertaining this idea that became candidates for me. That was OBC and Wild Hair in the back location there that Hank Jarbo owns. And so both those property owners were interested, but for the purposes of AT&T, they were located outside that search ring. I think from OBC was 0.12 mile away, and I think it was Jarbo's property was like 0.24, 0.26 miles away. So they're outside that range, and it starts to get sketchy as far as the coverage that cell tower is going to give in terms of what you're looking there on the map for those other blue dots. It has to do with terrain and location and height. I did offer up those alternative candidates, but they said, nope, this other one's right smack in the middle of our ring in it. That's where we'd like to go. So that's when I started discussions with Pacific Pride.
And inside your package is an RF justification, and part of the reason that those two candidates were rejected as a primary candidate, if you will, is because, as Chip mentioned, they're outside of the search ring, and they don't provide the appropriate amount of service or coverage to cover that area that you see there in yellow. I don't think I have anything else that I can tell you about this particular site.
Can I interrupt you?
Certainly.
I'm not the most technologically savvy guy on the planet. Let's pretend for a moment that I know nothing
Okay.
about this. So I see those little blue dots
Yep.
out there, which I understand to be,
Existing AT&T sites.
okay. And so, and then we got this yellow thing in the middle where there's no coverage.
Right.
So are you telling me that the people in that yellow area, you can't make a cell phone call, you get nothing, or, again, I don't know. I mean, I drive there, I've made cell phone calls from
Right.
that area, so I'm curious. I guess I just don't know.
So my understanding is that there is limited coverage there, but it's very weak. You may be able to make a phone call, but maybe not from inside a building or inside a vehicle. So the coverage there is at a level that isn't appropriate for, I'm losing my words.
So what would you say is the radius of that?
Oh. I don't know.
Is that the radius you mean from the other
Yeah, from
blue
the,
dots cell towers?
from the center where you're gonna put the cell tower.
Sure.
It looks like it's gonna cover all the yellow area there. What is the radius, of that area?
You know, and I didn't see that, or get the distance that RF engineers put on it at AT&T as far as that red circle, but I would guesstimate that that's probably going to be a circumference of probably a 2-mile search ring, or not search ring, I'm sorry,
Coverage ring.
coverage ring. And
part of that too that you have to understand is while there may be very limited coverage in that area coming from the adjacent sites, because of the heavy usage in this area, that service is, as I said, every cell site is finite, so you can only make so many calls to each tower, if you will. It can only handle so much traffic. And then once that traffic is at capacity, you start not being able to make phone calls at all.
or they drop.
Or they drop, or you get weird sounds on your phone.
Well, and one of the main things we've seen as all of our kids, you know, have these cell phones that are $1,000 now, but part of that, what goes that is the data. So that's kind of why it's creating offloading. When they say offloading, what they're meaning is that those towers to the north, they're full at capacity, so there's need to be another tower somewhere located centrally for all of those to be able to offload some of that data and voiceability. And so that's kind of one of the driving forces these days, is that
Data.
there's so much data going on. You know, especially I think for AT&T in the location of the high school. What happens is you do have drop calls. I have AT&T, and I've lived in Canby for almost 3 decades. I don't get it at my house, and I'm in one of those yellow areas. But my data is terrible in terms of download speeds and upload speeds. So, you know, that's when they give me a search ring. They become really finite in their decision making of making sure, saying, Chip, we really got to find something in that search ring to maximize our coverage for data and voice within this whole area. Could be a 2-mile or 3-mile circumference.
Right. Yeah, and when you're talking about data, you're not talking about just your kids sitting on the, Googling things. You got to think also that data is push notifications, right? I don't know how many of you get random emails, and you get your emails. I get an email notification. We won't talk about my Facebook notifications. That's ridiculous. But all of those types of things, I get notifications from my bank if there's an issue that's come up at my bank. Thank you, bank. So that data is coming in all the time. It's not just coming in when somebody's reaching out and say, hey, Google, find me this. You're always getting some kind of push notification, emails coming in on your phone, and a myriad of other things depending upon how people are using their phones. Did that help you, sir?
Yeah, we did. I guess I just don't understand, how you're surrounded by little blue dots out there where other facilities, and yet in the center of all of that, there's poor coverage. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, each cell tower only covers a specific area, and so there are always going to be poor coverage areas until we can get them infilled.
And variables being height of those other existing
Right.
towers, topography.
Topography, trees, all of those things impact how it's going to propagate.
Given that, each one of those blue dots are receiving and transmitting to the other locations. So hence what they're doing here is finding a central location to be able to receive and transmit back and forth between them so that they can have some kind of line of sight to them.
Right.
Hey, I kind of like Chair Savory. I'm not scientific or an engineer or anything like that, but I do have a couple of questions for you. We have a citizen here that brought some concerns about the health of some of the frequencies. I'm not even sure that's within our jurisdiction, first of all, to determine. However, I do take some issue with, and I'm not sure if you wrote this or if your lawyer did, but it looks like you're saying that we're not even allowed to consider what she brought up. I take issue with that because I don't see anything within the law. One of the things that the city prides itself in is for citizens to come in here and tell us what they think. That's the function of this body. And so I want to know, it says specifically on page 45 of your application, it would be page 46 of the actual packet. You say, this issue is preempted under federal law, and any testimony or documents introduced relating to the environmental or health effects of the proposed facility should be disregarded in this proceeding. I agree with you that the federal statute takes the environmental concerns about it, but no case law, and certainly not the law, mentions anything about health. Can you tell me what I missed, if I missed anything?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, and it is my understanding that the Telecom Act of 1996 does preclude the local jurisdictions from making or basing a denial based on health effects. I always feel like a jerk when I say it, but it does come with good reason. I always hear, that RF is harmful to, it's, one of the top things that I always hear wherever I go as far as regardless of jurisdiction or anything. And the short answer to that is cell towers operate at thousands of times below the FCC requirements. That is who we're beholden to make sure that these towers are safe. So the FCC sets a specific standard, and that standard that they set is based on scientific data, not just from the FCC, but internationally and through many different studies. We operate at such a low threshold that there's no health impacts to be anticipated.
So I guess my question is, if you can't point me to the place in the law that says that we can't consider health, do you have any objection to the citizen that's here tonight speaking about it?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Okay, Larry.
So this will be a 4G tower? No chance of it being upgraded to a 5G?
It could be in the future, yes.
Could all the cell towers around here, Brian, go to 5G after we give them permission to build the poles?
Yeah, I don't know much about the technology either. I just know that 5G is considered small cell sites right now, and that doesn't mean they couldn't utilize cell towers, but they're trying to locate on light poles and telephone poles is what 5G is attempting to do right now, and be much more well distributed. There's no need for them to do the expense of building a cell tower for the 5G need, which is much more distributed, many, many, many more sites to get the capacity that we're now getting and may get with autonomous vehicles and those kind of things. They need to quintuple the data link, and that's why 5G is coming on.
Question.
Will 5G, again, prefaces by saying I'm technology Neanderthal. So 5G sounds more than 4G. So if this is a 4G tower, why are we considering that if 5G is the new technology?
If I may.
You may.
Thank you, good sir. So what we're talking about as far as 5G and what we call small cells, they are low-powered, evenly distributed throughout cities and towns. If you think about the cell tower that we're doing here, think of a beach, and our cell tower is the big rock that covers a greater portion of the area. And the small cells are kind of like the sand and the beach, in that they get into smaller areas that that tower may not be able to because it's blocked by a building. So perhaps like an alleyway, where the tower is, it cannot maybe get into that alleyway, but the lower small cells can, because there are more of them distributed throughout the city. And again, they're much lower power than even our macro sites.
Yeah, I don't deal with the small cell technology. I just macro for cell towers. What I do understand, in talking to some of the engineers about it, just because I'm curious, is the antennas are about, our antennas are about anywhere from 6 foot to 8 foot tall. Small cell is about 2 foot in height. But what they do is they only have a carry distance, where they have to have good line of sight to another antenna, is about 200 to 300 feet. Can't have trees in the way, can't have buildings in the way. I think Brian addressed that, where there's more of them just because, and they're down lower, on utility poles, light poles, to cover those small areas. And so the distance is really restrictive.
Right.
I was talking to somebody that were doing a small cell project in Portland, and they needed a ton of different locations within downtown just because of how many buildings they are. So they got to shoot from inside one building to down a street that they have access to another location, that it trades off to another location, but they all are 200 to 300 feet away from each other. So whereas these, as you can see on the map right there, is actually picking up, transmitting and receiving from locations that are far away.
I can talk to you about the technology, but that's not really what we're here for. But I do have a question about the site selection.
Sure.
It looks like, just from my eyes, that across the street would be a much better location without any issues with things falling over.
Well,
and
which
causing any
property?
problems. Well, like the truck sales, it's right across the street. It's a big parking
Across
lot there.
99.
Yeah, across 99.
Yeah, he was non-responsive.
Gotcha. So none of those properties across there at all?
I reached out to all of them. I mean, I know all, I lived there for 27 years, so I know everybody in the community. So I did reach out and talk to everybody. A couple times to him, I can't remember his name now, but yeah, he was non-responsive to that. So I was like, okay. I did have 3 candidates, which for site acquisition purposes is the standard. They want to see at least 3. If you go and they give a search ring, they want to see 3 in the ring. I was able to provide 1 in the ring, and then 2 outside of that search ring. And the truck sales was kind of right in there too. So he was another main target for me, but never responded.
And just to answer the question on the technology, there will not only be millimeter wave, which is on the small cell deployment, but that's mostly going to be for urban city areas. They have plenty of standards that are out with lower frequencies, like in the 3.5 range, that will be on these towers for 5G. 5G is just a standard. It's based on what your frequency you're using for that standard to deploy it. The higher you go, millimeter wave, 24 gigahertz, 28 gigahertz. You can do a lot of bandwidth, but very short distances like he was talking about. In the 3.5 gigahertz, you can do better propagation, longer distances, but not as much bandwidth in there, but still better than 4G.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
I did want to point out one thing too. During our conversations with Ryan, one of the things came up was, in our goal to make this as palatable as possible, was to do a monopine here, and we talked about design quite a bit. I just found out tonight this would be your very first mono fir in town, so if approved, we'll go with that. So I'm hoping that you'll understand that we really are here to work with the city. We're not trying to.
So, going back to the break point, have you ever had a cell tower collapse?
Have I, sorry?
Has AT&T ever had a cell tower collapse?
I cannot speak to that. I have seen after Hurricane Katrina, I worked on a project doing inventory on Hurricane Katrina sites. And of those particular sites, again, you know, they're structurally engineered specifically for hurricane weather, and that was a much greater hurricane than they were expecting. I only ever saw a site that bent, but did not fall. They were bent in very interesting ways. Her antennas bent in very interesting ways.
Okay. Any further questions?
I had a question.
Andre.
So after, say, 10 or 20 years of this fur being alive and the paint starts fading and it starts looking like a dead fir tree, is it going to be repainted, or is it going to look like a dead fir tree for the next 20 years?
I believe that's part of the maintenance condition that Ryan has asked that you approve as a condition, and we agree with. It will be maintained throughout the life of its use.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that it doesn't cause a lot of people complaining that it looks like an eyesore in town, because it is along the highway. And
Right.
it should look like a fir tree if it's going to
Should
be
look like
put
a
up
fir
like
tree.
a fir tree.
Although I did see a picture of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, which I very much approved of. That one.
Along that note, when it's not useful anymore, will it be removed or will it be left?
It will be removed. It's a portion of the lease agreement.
It's a 25-year lease,
Okay.
and so there is removal language in the end, returning it back to the condition it was originally.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have one, just one.
Just,
I know there are people here concerned about, we've got a letter here about it, and about the health concerns,
indeed, I've read it.
and it might save them some time if you gave me an answer on this, about the mean electronic force field, first 4G versus 5G, and whether all these things that this letter say are something to be concerned with, or is it just hype? Do you know?
So here's the thing about information like that. It's very emotional. It is very emotionally based, and it's going to be very much what you as a person find to be true. The only thing that I can say is I can reference you to additional websites, the American Cancer Society, World Health Organization. Oh, gosh, there's so many other sites out there, and ask that you do your research with those sites as well. They're peer-reviewed documentation. It's a source that is, not necessarily federally funded, but they give good information. And they break it down in a manner that makes sense. Does that help?
Well, I wish you'd have brought some of those
I
quotes
would be
with you.
happy to send them.
If I may, the submittal materials that were in the packet, they did include a electromagnetic exposure analysis. So that's part of the background information that they have that's signed by an engineer, having to do with the exposure of people to the RF.
Looks like
Can you
it's,
give us some information on that analysis?
so I can read you his conclusion. Would that be?
Yeah, would help.
I'll just jump straight to the conclusion. Based on calculations, the proposed WCF will comply with current FCC and county guidelines for human exposure to radio frequency electromagnetic fields. All representations contained herein are true to the best of my knowledge, signed and stamped.
That's based on the 4G?
It's for what's going on that facility at this point. We can see he's got, within this, he's got all the different antennas along with, everything that he needed to do his study. And again, as the FCC states, we are thousands of times below the federal limit, thousands of times.
Jeff?
Just to be clear, your position, though, is that we're not empowered to or able to make a judgment on health or deny this application on that basis. Is that your position?
It is, sir.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you much.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak in favor of the project? I've got 2 slips here. One of them just spoke. Okay, then I will need to hear from Bria Snyder. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Is that,
I was hoping you weren't going to call me first, though.
pardon me?
I was hoping you weren't going to call me first, though.
You're the only one.
You'll be fine.
And you're technically second.
Yeah, right,
Well,
right.
Patricia decided not to sign one of these. So you're ready to go? State your name and address, please.
My name is Bria Snyder, and I'm 21,000 South Grace Hill Lane, Oregon City, Oregon, 97045. The reason I'm here is because my children are in the Canby School District, and this is going to be erected next to the high school, so that's why it brings concern to me. I don't feel like I can state too much because I have a lot of health concerns about it, and obviously it won't be heard or used. However, looking at the diagrams that I saw, it does not look super appealing personally as a citizen who's lived here. The FCC data thing that she was stating about in the law, I feel like was back when we had brick phones, and we currently have computers now, and so I feel like the stuff that goes along with the laws is dated. So I feel like that isn't even a good debate to go on because it's not even current. But again, I can't talk about that because it's not something that can even be heard. Anyways, as a citizen that lives in Canby, loves Canby, wants my children to continue going to Canby schools, I would just completely oppose this in every sense of the word.
Okay. Any questions for Bria? Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak?
Can I change my mind?
It is your prerogative as usual, so yes, feel free. Step forward, name and address.
Got her form filled out.
I know, just didn't manage to get from there to here.
Okay. I submitted the documentation that you have, and it says 4G exposure causes. And the list is here. There are 6 items, and they're very serious. Damaged DNA, risk of cancer, risk of leukemia, risk of neurodegenerative diseases, risk of miscarriage, etc. And I think our teenagers have enough problems. And I, like many of you, do not know too much about this kind of thing. But the World Health Organization says, where is it? I just saw it. Just had it here. Where did it go? Anyway, the World Health Organization says there's a problem. World Health Organization says some of the more serious illnesses caused not by 5G, but by 4G exposure. And those are the ones I just mentioned. I understand how much we love our electronics, but maybe we could talk about reducing the usage instead of endangering our health. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But I think that our kids' health is probably more important. Not just our kids, but everyone's health is more important than being the best and the fastest and the latest and the most modern technology. And I understand what is being said about the coverage. I don't understand why it's not covering. That diagram doesn't look, there are quite a few towers, and it looks like it's a little closer to the others than it might need to be. I don't know. I'm not the engineer. But these are serious things to think about, and I don't think our school needs any more depressed kids or any more that are having nerve problems or whatever this is inclined to cause in the short term or in the long term. I came with more questions than answers. And some of them have been answered. Some of them have been answered. I guess that's all I have to say. I think that's pretty important. And this lady who wrote this is no flake. And that's why I put her author, her name, and her accomplishments on the first page.
Any questions?
Yeah, just real brief. I don't know if you can answer it or not. Maybe you can if you've done some research into it, and maybe it was mentioned and I missed it. Are there any other 4G towers in Canby right now?
I do not know.
Okay.
I know she mentioned in here that the one, the 5G locations, she personally fought the fact that they were going in by elementary schools. So it seems strange. Of course, in my opinion, the kids need to put their cell phones in their pockets when they walk into school, but they don't. And then there are the computers and so forth. So that is a high usage area probably, but there are things that can be done. I'm a former teacher, I think if adults get in control, you can exert some discipline and lower the usage, probably, unless that's not the main cause of the overusage. I don't know, but I imagine it's the school.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Thank you. You were shaking your head about other 4G towers.
Would you like me to?
Sure, I would.
Okay. The rebuttal time.
This is your rebuttal time, so state your name and address again, please.
I never remember my corporate address. Sharon Gretsch, on behalf of AT&T. SmartLink's address is 11410 Northeast 122nd Way, Suite 102, Kirkland, Washington. I think the question that came up is, are there other 4G towers in town? I think all of them are 4G. At this point, that's pretty much the standard as I understand it. Yes? Yes. Getting the nod.
Okay. Do we know how many there are?
The ones I'm aware of, the storage facility towards Fred Meyer for BLC, the cemetery, southwest, or southeast side. And I haven't looked at it, but I do believe there's one over towards Johnson Controls. That's near the police station.
Okay. So at least two then.
Yeah, at least two. I think the one near the storage unit was, I think that was put in 1996. If I remember right.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Not about this, about the concern with the tower falling over.
Yes.
I heard a couple of numbers. I heard one that the tanks were about 50 feet away. And then I heard you guys say that the tower was going to collapse at 60 feet. So is there a discrepancy of 10 feet that I'm missing? Is that shorter? Is that longer? What's the issue?
In the very unlikely event that it would collapse, we planned on 60 feet to...
Something forward, and we don't have the attorney that wrote this in front of us telling us where he got his information, or if he made it up, I think we're well within our right to consider it, and I don't like, an attorney that's not here telling a planning commission that has a concerned citizen that this isn't something that they can consider. That's my 2 cents on it.
Question or comment regarding Commissioner Adams. You mentioned, did they, in your citing of the code there, the federal, you said radio frequency effects?
Radio frequency emissions, so
Emissions, yeah. So can you read that wording again, please?
yeah, so we'll start here. So, no state or local government or instrumentality thereof may regulate the placement, construction, and modification of personal wireless service facilities on the basis of the environmental effects of radio frequency emissions to the extent that such facilities comply with the Commission's regulations concerning such emissions. So I think
Gotcha.
So it'd have to be,
Health effects.
is health included within the definition of environmental? And I didn't see that it was. And, you know, I see case law from some other jurisdictions, but there's no footnote here that gives us any idea of what they were going off of. And so that's where I was like, man, I don't really know that that's the case.
Okay.
And I don't know that that would affect my decision based on what's in front of us. But they've asked us here, in the applicant changed their position, they've asked us not even to allow this evidence in front of us.
I think they were overstepping.
Yeah.
But I feel that frustration. I've been through this before with AT&T. So I'll save my comments when it's my turn.
The final comment that I would have is I would not vote no at this point based on the health effects, just because I don't think I have enough information in front of me on that. I am concerned about the 50 to 60 foot discrepancy there. And to the extent that, you know, Commissioner Moturn brought up that there are other available sites, maybe they didn't respond to them. I mean, that's, in my mind right now, I'm sort of undecided, and I'm curious what the rest of the commissioners are going to have to say on it. But that is a real concern to me, probably outweighing the health effect. So that's where I fell on it.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, as far as the design and all that stuff, I don't have any problem with that. I think it's a good gesture that you're putting up the fir tree, and I know or the fir pole. There are big tanks there and fuel tanks. There are the gas tanks, and I'm concerned about, I don't believe this pole would ever collapse on them. I'm sure that it's engineered well enough to withstand a hurricane. But I am kind of concerned with it only being 50 feet from the pumps. As far as the health stuff, that really concerns me, but I don't know enough about it. And today, everything is so sensationalized, and you hear everything's going to kill you. It's like there's a kind of a war on technology at the same time. But I would wish that I wish that you actually had brought in, especially if you knew that you saw these things. I wish you'd have brought in some actual quotes from your organizations that you quoted to me that, you know, that debunk these accusations, I guess is what they are. And as far as the paperwork we have where the engineer signed off on it, I mean, how old is this? Are these regulations are they old or are they new? So I do worry about that, and I wish we had time to really dig into it. So I'm kind of in the middle right now.
Okay. Jeff?
I'm going to vote to approve this, but I'm not happy about it. I feel like the law is being somewhat misrepresented by the applicant. I don't buy your statement. On the other hand, I don't feel empowered to question it very much. This is a land use body, and I think we can get into health and safety, and I think your concerns about the tower collapsing, there's going to be a lot of wind loading on this fir that most cell towers don't see. So when you start talking about hurricanes experience in Florida, I'm not buying it, okay? Because this is a different animal. It's going to have a lot of wind load with all that beautiful camouflage on it, which is probably why you're giving us the breakaway design. So I have a lot of skepticism about the approach that AT&T takes here, and I have a lot of skepticism too about how the feds allow this and basically tell us you can only look at this. So I'm cranking a lot. I'm also looking at the other citizens out here and saying, you really need to think about what body you should be approaching with your concerns. I mean, we're really limited in our ability. Your arguments have to go to the state of Oregon and to the federal government, I think, to really carry some weight, and possibly to the school district also. And I guess I could go on, but I'll keep it short and cut it off there.
Derek?
Okay, a few things. So on the health, I can't really speak to that. I'm not a doctor. I do know that the industry is heavily regulated based on frequencies that are used, license frequencies, so the FCC regulates that. So you have to, on an annual basis and sometimes quarterly basis, provide information to the FCC on the power of these devices and what they're registering at and what a spectrum analyzer registers these at. So those are heavily regulated. Whether it's within specs from a government standpoint, if you trust the government, I don't know, I can't speak to that, but it is heavily regulated. So I know it's tested. All radio frequency that's licensed is tested. So I can't speak to that, and I can't speak. I do understand the rules there, and that's environmental, and whether they stretch that from a health concern, I can't speak to that as well. I do think the design is a good design for Canby, much better than the towers we have today, because I think it fits better. I think it looks better. My issue that I have is with the location and the major variance. I think it's a bad location. I think not just the gas pumps, but just the other side of the variance here is 5 feet, right, to the property line?
13.
13?
13 is the closest property line.
13. And there's buildings there, and the real thing is not wind here, it's earthquakes, right? It's those things falling down and collapsing on somebody or something. I think there's better locations. I think that I'm going to vote no, because I think that you can find a better location. I would vote yes if you were in a better location, like across the street, because I do think it's a great design. I think AT&T needs the extra coverage. I know that we have complaints all the time about that coverage. So I'm for that. I think that those kind of services are complementary to the type of services that my company provides. But I just think you're trying to stick a round peg in a square hole, or vice versa to that, and try to stick this in somewhere where I think you can find some room. It's my 2 cents.
Jennifer?
I'm not going to address the FCC issues because I think that's the purpose of the rule that they have, is that we aren't educated to the level of being able to make health decisions. And that's not our job. Our job is for the land use portion of it, and does it meet our applicable standards. And I think that that's the biggest issue is, our findings on this need to fit the applicable standards. And if we're not going to find for it, then we need to articulate why in relation to what the standards are and what it needs to have. The main thing is that it would be a major variance. And so if we were to vote no on this, the findings would have to mention those specific issues, and that it, didn't meet the variance, or that we were providing a variance or would not be providing that variance. The question I had, though, that I just realized is, was there a neighborhood meeting on this?
Yes.
Okay.
No residents attended. It was just me and the applicant.
Okay. But it was advertised
It
to
was
500
held,
feet and everything
yeah,
that needed
500
to do.
feet.
So there was a neighborhood meeting prior to this. Okay, that was my only other question on that.
Okay, thank you. I'm with Commissioner Mills. I'll probably vote for it extremely reluctantly. I find it, odious that we cannot consider the health concerns of the citizens of Canby. I think that that's just plain wrong. I also agree that we could probably find a better location, but that wouldn't mitigate the health concerns either. So that's my 2 cents worth as well. I did have concerns about how this is going to affect the health of our citizens. I don't know the reliability of some of the cited citations that Ms. Smith gave. You can find a lot of stuff on the internet. But I've been hearing about it for years, but I will probably very reluctantly vote yes. So I will entertain a motion to approve the city file number DR 19-01 /CUP 1901 /VAR 1902.
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Turn my mic on. Nay.
Okay. So can we do a voice vote? So you're voting,
I was a yes.
You're a yes.
Show of hands.
okay.
I was for.
Okay. All those in favor, raise their hand. All opposed? So we do not get the approval. So there you go. So thank you very much, and we'll move on to the next item. This will be a presentation and action to adopt the Canby Housing Needs Analysis, which provides guidance to the City of Canby decision makers regarding the provision of land to meet the future housing need. Do I need to?
No need to do that.
Okay. So, Ryan, we haven't told us it's going to give her the presentation.
We changed.
Yeah, presto changeup. It's not the benefit of a phone booth or anything.
I do have to have eyeballs, though. Pass this over. Thanks. Let's see here. Mousky. Mouse. Deal with the mouse. The mouse isn't working. Oh, thought Ryan was using it. There we go. Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening, people in the audience, and maybe people at home. This is not actually a public hearing, but it's, we thought we would advertise it so the public would have an opportunity to be familiar with what this housing needs analysis is all about. And the council and the commission had a joint workshop on this, and we've made a few minor adjustments to the document based on that workshop. And basically, it was to incorporate some comments that our city administrator had regarding the toolkit and the financing part of the toolkit. He gave some very good comments about how those different financing mechanisms might impact a community. So those comments were, he did that, and I incorporated those comments. The other thing that I did was on the policy considerations, I made sure that each consideration actually did come across as a consideration, not as a have to. It was like consider this, consider that. And I think that was a concern that since this is going to be a guidance document, it's not a comp plan amendment at this time. we didn't need to have language that said you must do this or that. Now, for some background, I'm sorry I'm repeating a lot of this from the workshop, but for the folks out there, it might be helpful just to go through and explain what this housing needs analysis is all about. Basically, it's going to be a requirement as of next year, according to the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They set, the state has goals, Goal 10 and Goal 14. There are land use goals. Those two particular goals give guidance to communities how to meet housing and urbanization for their various community in the future of a 20-year time frame. So what DLCD asks communities to do is that you look out 20 years, and that's a little bit of a crystal ball, but they set forth guidelines on how to conduct a housing needs analysis. And we're supposed to look at how the housing needs of Canby citizens will be in the next 20 years. And you look at demographics, you look at trends, you look at state, local, and national trends. You also coordinate in Oregon, it's Portland, in this area is Portland State University is charged with doing the forecasting for population. So we use their population because that's a requirement as well now. We also coordinated with Clackamas County Housing Needs Analysis, so we were all kind of on the same page because they did projections. But so what you do is you look at all these growth factors, and I'll go through this quickly, but you look at that and then you look at your urban growth boundary. That's not the city limits of Canby, but it's the urban growth boundary of Canby. And you look within that and you look at the zoning and you see if there's enough land that will meet the forecasted demand for housing in your community.
Matilda, would you take, since I'm thinking of our TV audience, would you take just a moment and explain what the urban growth boundary represents?
Yeah, the urban growth boundary, in fact, the urban growth boundary was adopted in like 1984 in Canby. And it's the boundary that the cities can actually grow into. Like, we have city limits, which is zoning, and then you have your urban growth boundary, which is what you can annex into the city without expanding that urban growth boundary. And on the comprehensive plan map, it's like Mulino and up the rivers kind of are our boundaries on almost like the north. There's, I think I even have a comp plan. Hang on here, let me see. I can show the comp plan map, I do believe. I hope I have my little stick. Yes, I do. Take just a second here. I will see if I can bring that up. Sorry, I should have probably loaded this up. Hello. Come on, puppy. There we go. So here's the comprehensive map of the city. And everything that's colored in that map is everything that is within our urban growth boundary. It's not, as you'll notice, it's not the same as city limits because this area in the orange is still outside. There's a black line here that's the city limits line, and there are properties that, and the red line is the urban growth boundary. So we're able to annex, if we have an applicant, any properties within the urban growth boundary that are currently not within the city limits without having to go to the Department of Land Conservation and Development and asking them to expand our urban growth boundary. So that's, and when land comes in, if we have an applicant and they want to annex property and the annexation goes through, the zoning, it becomes supposedly, the zoning becomes what it says it's supposed to be in the comp plan. Now that's, as we'll see soon, that is not always the case. But it's supposed to, like if the comprehensive plan is low-density residential, that would come in as R1 in our zoning. So if something comes in and it's in the county and it's a 5-acre minimum, when it comes in, it will take the zoning of our comprehensive planning map. So that's why they look at the comprehensive plan map as the guidance for the 20 years, because they think in 20 years you're able to grow out to that comprehensive urban growth boundary. So get us back to here if we can. So anyway, so we have statutes we're supposed to meet. Currently, cities from 10,000 to 25,000 are required to do a buildable lands analysis to find out for a 20-year period, but they haven't been required in the past to do a full-blown housing needs analysis, and that's just a much greater detail. However, that's going to happen next year. So we kind of got ahead of the curve here, and DLCD was very happy about that. And if we go to all the trouble of doing the buildable lands analysis, then you might as well do the other and have it done. So hopefully we'll have ours done. So we have to look at all the various housing types. And we look, this is a process chart. It's easier just to explain it than probably look at that. But basically you inventory what is already built in your community, like literally what is built. You take that out of your land base, and you also then take out any constrained lands like wetlands, steep slopes, parks, schools, churches, public buildings, federal, state, and local, and you remove that from the land base because you're allowed to do that because they probably are not going to develop in that 20-year period. And then you remove, you remove your infrastructure from that land base, and you use allowed percentage. We use like 20% infrastructure for residential, low density, and 15 for medium and high density. And then you come up with your available lands, and you look at that by each category, and that's your buildable lands portion. You have just base land that you look at how many acres are you having in low density, medium density, high density residential, and what you can perhaps have in any commercial that allows that. And that becomes the basis of the buildable lands portion of the housing needs analysis. Then you look at your demographic trends. We look at it as this shows. You look at the national, state, and local. I looked at the county as well, and you look at your growth rates. And you might notice that Canby says the growth rate is 2.3%, annual average growth rate. We're using a 1.6% average annual growth rate because that's what Portland State University says we're using. So we don't have an option of saying that we're going to grow different than they say because they're the specialists, so we use their figures. The household size we use, according to the census, the most recent, it was 2.75 people. And then we look at the trends, and basically this summarizes a very long document, but we're actually very similar to both the state and the county and the nation in the fact that, guess what, we're getting older. The baby boomers are aging, and they're going to continue to age, and that's going to have some effect on us. No matter what we try, we're still going to age. Also, the millennials are going to be playing a huge part of this. Let me get something out of here. Because the millennials are going to become like the largest segment of the population. And in 20 years, the millennials are going to be the major buyers and consumers of houses. So they're also going to be the largest group in history. So they're going to impact us. And so that's going to be driving a lot of the demand. for housing. There's also increased diversity, and Canby tends to be actually more diverse than either the state or the nation or the county. We have a very, about 20% of our population is Hispanic. Probably should say it's Latinx. If you're going to be gender neutral, I forget to use the most recent jargon sometimes. Also, something that's a national, state, and local trend is that housing costs, and we all know this, are increasing faster than our salaries are. So there's a pretty big disparity now, and that ends up being cost burden. So if your cost burden, if the standard says your cost burden, a family is cost burden if you pay more than 30% of your income for housing. Then there's another level that's called severely cost burden, which means if you're a household and you're paying 50% or more of your income on housing, that's considered severely cost burden. And in Canby, that is, renters are, and in general, renters are more cost burden than our households, but some of our households are cost burden. I have a graphic that shows that as well. But how that plays into the housing needs analysis is if you're a city, there's a whole list of cities and there's a cost burden rate. And if the renter severely cost burden percentage is 25% or more, you have a special requirements from DLCD. Where Canby is at like 16. If you look at some, it says 14, but it's not more than 16% of our renters are severely cost burden. So we don't have to meet the extra threshold. What we have to do is just identify, how we're going to help, some ways that we might help to provide housing at all different income levels. So we also have Canby. We have a very low vacancy rate, which I'm sure people that try to find houses in Canby figure that out pretty fast. It's like 2.6. That's really low. And our housing stock is really aging. I believe that there's like 70-some% of our housing is over 20 years old. So that's a pretty old housing stock. And somehow that surprises me because it feels like we're building. But when you look at what is out there, we do have a fairly old aging housing stock. Also, Canby is the demographic trends in Canby. 80% of the workers who live in Canby leave to work elsewhere. But, this is the big but here, 48% travel less than 10 miles to work. That's very attractive to people that don't want to have to drive that far to work. So that keeps Canby positioned to be in pretty market demand for homes because people can live here and work within 10 miles of where they live. So that's going to keep us a hot market, I believe. 72% of Canby households earn between 50 and 120% of the Clackamas County median family income, which is also what we have to use. We're in Clackamas County, so they apply it to Canby as well. That is probably, I have another graphic, I'll show this, but there's a quite underserved group of homeowners and that are not able, or not homeowners, but residents who are unable to buy a home based on the fact that they make less than 50% of the median family income. And the greatest deficit is in the lower range from 41,000 and below. And we also have a deficit of housing for very high income. We seem to have a sweet spot. It seems to be Canby is somewhere between like $350,000 to $450,000. It seems like all the houses that come on the market kind of tend to be in that price range. We don't seem to be able to provide much of any other category. So the median family income is $81,400. So that's, even at that sounds like a fairly good income. A house, you can afford a house probably up to about $324,000 $4,000. So even if you have a fairly good income in Canby, you're still going to struggle a little bit to try to find homes in the price range that you can afford. So the other demographic trends, I told you we do the 1.6 annual average growth rate. That projects us to have about 25,000 plus people in the next 20 years. This is if we grow faster, we grow faster. We might not grow as fast. Or sometimes we've only grown 0.9%, and sometimes it's 2.3, sometimes a little higher than that. So over time, it works out. And here's a little demographic about the boomers that we are dying, folks. The millennials are rising. This nice red line here shows that they're increasing, and so are the post-millennials. Those are all going to be a major factor in our housing. We have consistently in Canby for the last, at least 20 years, probably from 1999 or even before, we really are really stable about the percentage of single-family and multifamily. It's about 60% single-family housing and 33% multifamily housing. Kind of averages out over time. We have some attached, single-family attached. It was like only 3%. I think that is probably not a very accurate accounting, and the reason why we don't have incredibly accurate accounting is we never sorted that out early on. We didn't call those out, so it was hard to track what we actually did. So I went, to the census. They also, the American Community Survey from the U.S. Census, they tried to track that stuff. So it looks like, since that is going to be more of a demand locally at the state level and at the national level, attached housing is probably going to increase across the board for everybody. So we're estimating maybe 7% of our housing in the future, because I think we will still remain a single-family home preference, detached single-family preference in Canby. It's been that way for a very long time. I see it continuing that way. And as the millennials and the post-millennials age, they also want detached single-family homes. So, yeah.
So how do you think that HB 2001 plays into what millennials want as opposed to what the state is asking, trying to require? And
well, I think if there are detached homes available, they would prefer to have them, but you have to provide them. I don't know how, having duplexes on every single-family zoned place, I don't know how popular that will be. It's a single-family home. If there's no affordable entry-level detached single-family homes, they'll probably like them. But I know that the preference is, the older they get, the preference increases that you want a detached single-family home. That's pretty clear in the literature. So I don't know. And I talked to DLCD about that HB 2001. They're supposed to be giving guidance. I think they put a little blurb out not too long ago. They have a long way to go to figure that out, and I think they're going to have a pretty good battle over some of that. So we'll see. We have till 2021, I think, to really kind of figure things out with that. But they have, I think that the dust hasn't settled on that. I think that
that's 2 short years. So
there is, but there's a lot of opportunity for groups to, go and lobby differently. But who knows? If for me, I have a personal opinion as a planner about this. It's sort of like, that sort of effectively eliminates low density. It's like a kind of a backdoor way of saying, let's just do inclusionary zoning and just do everything everywhere. Because it really, if every single family lot can be a duplex, it just makes sense that if a developer can put 2 houses on one, I would expect most developers would like to maximize I would, their investment, and do that. That doesn't mean that all the existing single-family are going to be knocked down or expanded. I doubt that, but I think it will have a pretty crazy impact in the future. And it will stop everybody from being able to expand the urban growth boundary for sure. Because we have land, zoned to meet our low density, but if that all of a sudden becomes medium density, that means we have to backfill all that before we can be approved to go forward with an urban growth boundary expansion if we need more land. So, I really have a hard time believing that this is going to stick outside of the Portland area, but maybe they have more power than I think they do. I don't know. So I don't know. I think it's like, yes, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, keep going.
No, I just think it goes against everything they've had us do for as long as I've been a planner. You look at the zoning and you plan to provide for all these categories, and then they just gut your category. To me, I'm like, well, wait a minute. And the same way with this, they're requiring everybody to do this, but then they're happy we did this, and yet if in 2 years we just have to double up our low density to make it medium density, and then we'll never be able to expand our urban growth. And maybe that's the intent. I don't know. It's possible.
Tilda, I wanted to go back to your statement about the projected growth rates, population growth rates, and I wanted to make sure I understood. I'm looking at page 29 of the needs analysis, where I think I'm understanding, and I think heard you say that over the last 27 years, Canby's grown at a rate of 2.3%. Is that right?
Yeah, here's this. Hang on.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is. So, that's, I'll tell you where that came from, because I was involved with that. That was, the Clackamas County did an analysis of growth, and we're still using that for the economic piece, and they settled on 2.3 as well, and we agreed to that. But then when Portland State became charged with being the forecasting body, they went with 1.6, and we were told that, and every community has to use whatever the Portland State came up with.
That was my next question to you, is, because that's a huge difference.
It is.
And I know we've talked, I wasn't able to attend the joint session, but I did listen to it and tried to gain as much as I could from it, and I've reviewed the report. And that's a significant difference in planning.
It's a pretty big difference.
And I'm feeling like that might be a battle worth fighting. I mean, in terms of going to the DCLC.
It depends on who you want to fight. I think the battle might, I don't know if battle's the right word, because DLCD says that that's what you have to do to use. If they're going to approve a housing needs analysis, we have to use those numbers. Now
I don't think,
no.
I understand that's what you said, and I understand that's what
So
they said.
for them to
I
approve
believe
this-
you. I'm just sitting here a little incredulous about, because I've been through this exercise before in another city with the same 1.6 number. And,
Although, over time,
well, no, I
things
don't,
do
over time, we've
fluctuate.
averaged 2.3%. That's what I'm seeing here. Over time, we've averaged 2.3, not 1.6.
that'd be the difference between 6,903 new people and about 10,500 people. So, and 1,400 units of single-family homes are divided by 5, we still have enough land.
Well,
But
let me go
I
on
mean,
for a
we
moment.
really do.
My
We
question is there any recourse we have in discussion with, this seems like a blanket application
No,
that, to me, makes
this
no
is
sense.
just, here's the way I think it would be good to look at this document. It's just a guidance document. It doesn't mean that if we ever wanted to expand our urban growth boundary, then we could come back and argue, look, here's the facts that, as we see them, but there's no reason to, they're not making us do anything based on this.
Well, I understand that, but I guess another statement you said, and I believe you, is that it's going to get harder and harder to move the urban growth boundary. As the new rules are.
I would assume it will.
As HB 2001 is implemented, and if it stays in force as it is, it's going to make it, we're going to have to get more intensive in our use of
Right.
lands that we have. So I'm, in general, I had no, this is great work. I had one request is whenever we can, try to show, you're showing revisions of, I'd love to see the edits so that I can look at it and say, oh, that's changed, that's changed, that's changed. So
Right.
that's just a comment, but
I
So-
can make a suggestion that I know has been done in other times.
Yeah.
In past housing needs analyses, not housing, we haven't done a housing needs analysis, but
But,
buildable lands analyses. Sometimes it's just been different now because they tell us we have to use this. See, before, we ran scenarios like 1.6, 2.3, and 2. Like, I'm just making up numbers, okay? But let's say that, then you say, if we grew at 1.6, this is the housing that we need. If we grow at 2%, this is what we need. And if we grow at 2.3, this is what we need. And you run like a little sidebar thing that says, so we
is
can-
that 1.6 in codified in law? Is it say, they've just declared that?
DLCD declares it is.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, what's their authority to do that versus our authority to use what we think is a better number?
Well,
So,
I'm saying
and
we could include
I'd
that.
suggest we be as aggressive as possible and as realistic as possible, stand up for ourselves as a city and say, we think our growth rate is different, and that's going to impact our inventory.
And I think that,
And I think we should
agree
do
with
that.
you. And I could run a 2.3% side by side. I could do the charts that say, okay, if we grow at 2.3, which we believe we will grow at, this is what we need. And I can do that. Only reason I didn't do that is because they said we had to use 1.6.
I understand, and I hesitate to make a bunch more work for you. I think this is something that has to be heard and discussed
But I think
by
we
the
can-
city fathers and by the,
But I think we can do that. You can see what it would be.
it's too important a question.
Because it's a guidance document, so you could say, look, here's what if we grow at 2.3, here's how much we're going to need in 20 years if we grow at this. And we can run it side by side, and we can still say, we used yours at 1.6, at 1.6, and then you can at least fight down the line if a fight is necessary to expand the urban growth boundary, if all kinds of things happen, if 2001 really, gets teeth in it or whatever, then we would have this document, then we could say, look, we ran these numbers at the same time that we ran this number. You approved this 1.6, we did that, but we also ran the numbers for this, and this is what we're going to need. Nothing else much will change. It isn't that much more work. I've already run the numbers, by the way, but, because I started this a while ago.
Well, I don't want to dominate the discussion here, so I'm going to.
No, but I think it's a legitimate, I think it's obvious when you see 2.3%, which is what then you say 1.6 is what the forecasting thing that we're supposed to be using. And I asked them about that, and I talked to DLCD about this, and they absolutely said,
We should question their authority to just choose a number that doesn't apply to us.
well, I'm completely open to running extra numbers, so we have that documented. If that would be something that would be helpful, we can run those numbers along here and say, if this scenario is at 2.3%, which we believe is probably more realistic, then we have those numbers, and then we can say, and we think that we'll need X number of land based on that. I don't think that's weird or anything. I think if that's something you'd like to do, I can certainly modify, put a page of 2.3% growth and let you see what that would be based on, nothing changes. I don't have to change the buildable lands. We have what we have land-wise. So I don't have to change much of anything other than the acres that we will need based on a different number of people.
Okay.
I'm happy to do that. If you folks
thank you.
decide that you would like me to include that, I'm happy to do that. I literally have run those numbers already. It won't take me a whole lot of time to do that. So I can add those tables, and then you could at least have them for a discussion. And if it's some future, I'll be on, in some future, if you need a document to bring forward, you'll have the document already.
Great.
And you've still abided by what they told us to do. We've been good little citizens and done what we're supposed to do. But we can also say, we actually think we might grow 2.3%. I think that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. I'm happy to do that. So if you want me to do that, I'll do that.
Did I mishear earlier that you said that we probably would still be fine with our acreage at 2.3?
I'm sorry?
Did I hear you say earlier, and I might have misheard it, but when you first started asking, I thought I heard you say that we'd probably be fine at 2.3% growth with our existing
Yeah, I
land?
think so, and I'll
Okay.
verify those.
But I think there's some assumptions there we've still got to talk about.
Yeah, there's all kinds of discussions that this document's going to generate.
Right.
So, and we'll get
Not the
to
least
one
of which is
those.
Willamette.
The biggest one is that one.
That's a huge issue. and
That's the
I think
gorilla in the
we have
room
to talk about
for
that
low
as well.
density. That's nothing I can make a decision
No, I
about.
understand.
But it's there in the document, so everybody knows that if you don't address that, that changes numbers. Then if that doesn't get addressed, the public probably doesn't know what we're talking about, so let's go through and we'll get to that, and I'll explain that Willamette Valley Country Club and how that impacts like 150 acres, basically, of low density, that if you remove it, we're fine at 1.6%. If we remove it at a 2.3% growth rate, we might squeak on that one. So that's something the decision makers, you guys are going to all have to wrestle that one down. Like, all I'm doing is showing you stuff.
The other thing, and I think that he touched on this just a moment ago, was when you make changes to this document, and you've already presented it to us once,
Yeah.
could you provide us with the red line version of it so
Sure.
we can see what
Yes,
the changes
please.
were?
It's kind of, I can try that. Most of the changes I've done are tables.
Right.
So, and I did print out some tables when I guess I can redline tables. I hadn't really redlined tables before, so I just printed extra copies. But I'll be happy to see if I can redline tables. Tables are
And
kind of
even,
weird.
I know you have to have the pretty copy to post online and everything, but even if it's something you could provide to us just so we can track
Yeah,
it.
there haven't been anything substantive. A lot of it's been like,
Yeah.
bloopers on my part, like I misspelled something or I flipped numbers back and forth, which I sometimes do. Excuse me.
So one question I wanted to get out there, and that is, what is the specific zoning of Willamette Valley Country Club? What is its zoning?
It's the zoning, which.
Yes,
The
the zoning.
zoning is different than the
Not the comp plan.
comprehensive plan designation.
What is the zoning?
The zoning is low-density residential. So I've got like 150 acres sitting out there
Okay.
of that. The comprehensive plan designation is private recreation.
Right.
So since we're there, I might as well say something about it. The problem with that is that if you have something that's designated one thing in the comp plan, usually the zoning is lesser, like usually like high density in the comprehensive plan, and then you have a low density in the zoning, and people upzone it to meet the comp plan, and that's supposed to be what they're supposed to try to follow the comp plan. But if you have a comprehensive plan that is more restrictive than the underlying zoning, there is no incentive for the people that have the
Right.
zoning at low density to make it, to restrict it to private recreation. So DLCD looked at this document, they've been reviewing it and going back and forth with me on stuff. Basically, they're happy with it, but they agree that that's sort of like never, they don't believe it will ever happen, that it will ever be private recreation, so they think
It's going to stay low density.
it's going to stay, and I believe that's true myself also.
That's typical for the state.
Yes, but the problem is, if we believe that it will stay, never be changed, but maybe the country club will be forever a country club, then we have this 150 acres saying we have to meet, we have 150 acres to build low-density residential in the future that may never be available to us, because as long as they're there, it's never available to us. So it bloats the numbers.
It increases density. It increases the pressure to increase density by leaving it LDR and a functioning country club.
Yeah, it just says that
Which
we
is
have
what
way
DLCD
more.
wants.
It has way more than what we say we have. And DLCD thinks that we should just change the comp plan. And I don't see why that's a bad thing, but I don't know. I have I think something has to happen. Either we have to make an agreement have a conversation with the Willamette Valley Country Club to decide how much of it they would be willing to say to keep maybe private, never ever develop it, and how much to be low-density residential. And if it stays all, then I don't know what we're going to do with that. I mean, it's going to be low-density residential, and we can't act like it's not out there because everybody's aware that it's out there. And tomorrow, they've come in 2 times in my tenure here and talked about developing the whole thing when they've been having a hard time in the past. So we've had 2 times they've come in and said, well, how many houses can we get on this? So tomorrow, they could decide to develop it if they wanted to.
They could decide to become a 9-hole.
Yes. So I don't know what to do with that. It's a very peculiar thing that really skews everything. But that's, like I say, it's not my decision. It's out there, and it's something that I think is going to have to be wrangled with. So I've just called it out in the document is all.
Well, just for the commission's information, the city of Eugene has converted about 18 holes right now to LDR, and they're building on them now. So that's happening now. So it does happen. And in the previous 20 years before that, they converted another 8 that was functioning within the city limits.
Well, the national trend is that, but with golf courses, but I think they just made a lot of improvements. I don't think they have any intention of converting anything, but you never know. 20 years is a long time. Let's put it that way. Anyway, we digress. Where are we? Well, so when you look at the future housing needs, boy, this is based on the 1.6 growth rate, and what it boils down to is we look at that, we look at the change in people. That's how many new people are expected to be here. This 6,803. That's from the Portland State University forecasting. The change in persons in group quarters. That's 0.6% or 0.006. Then you divide that by our 2.75, which is higher than the normal. That's higher than the state or the national or the county. 2.75 people per household is higher, and I think that's because of the higher Hispanic population we have. They tend to have more people, larger families, so I think that reflects accurately, actually. And then the vacancy rate, 2.6% or 0.026. Then you subtract the vacancy rate, and you end up with these total new dwelling units that we think we're going to have by 2039, new ones. And if you divide that out, it's 119 or 120 new dwelling units annually. And there are charts in here that make your eyes bug out, but one of them shows sort of our the trends on average, and over over many years, we have averaged about 114, 115. I mean, it's been consistently averaging that. Some years we have 0 buildings, but then some we have 200 and some. But when you take that long view, that's actually really in line with the past 20 years. So interesting. I mean, it's kind of interesting that played out to meet sort of the past and the present and the future are all kind of copacetic on that one. So then we were supposed to the 48 here is you're just supposed to say how you're going to allocate it. That's a kind of a guess, but you look at what's been done in the past and you assume that it's going to stay something like that. So we divide in the 60% of the single family, and then 33% for the multifamily, and the 7% for attached. And you say which land use are you going to allocate those in? And basically all our high density goes in our high density, all the multifamily goes into our high density, and a little bit goes into our commercial, because we allow, like, Hanlon development, for instance. And then the same way with most of our low density becomes our single family are in low density and medium density, and more's in low density and medium density. And the attached, we assume that most of that's going to be in the higher density stuff. But some of them we can put an attached single family, one or two units in the medium and low density. It doesn't change the number of total units. It's just sort of, we had to tell DLCD where we think they're going to go. So that's what that is. It's not saying they have to go there. It's just saying, hey, this is based on our past. This is what we think the future is going to look like. And based on the trends that are out there, that's our best guess of what it's going to be. And all of this is a best guess, by the way. You use the numbers you can get from the best, numbers people. You can usually the census and the American Community Survey, and you look through all the documents, and then DLCD tells you what they'll accept. Which numbers they'll let you use of the census data, and then you get to go with that number. And that's where the vacancy rates came, and the group quarters, that's right out of the census data. So that's where those numbers, the percentages come from there. I just used what was out there now. And we talked about this already, but it's a really interesting thing, and this is just really, I pulled this out of the housing needs analysis that when the county was working on it, and I was sitting in on that. And so they had this really great county affordability thing, and it kind of shocked me, I guess, because it really does show that if you make $65,000, you can only afford like a $228,000 to $260,000 home.
Your interest rates on that looks like your mortgage rates look like they're running around 7 to 8%.
It might be.
That'd be my guess. So.
But it just surprised me that, we just don't have a lot of housing in that area. So a whole lot of people in Canby are not able to find a house that they can probably pay for without really spending more than they probably should have. The two-income family is how they do that.
That's how you do it.
That's right. But this is a household income. So, yeah, that kind of explains what happens. And this is the cost burden stuff that I was telling you about, that the DLCD regulates what you have to do, what sort of things you have to, processes you have to do if you happen to have renter cost burdening, severe cost burdening over 25%, which we do not have. But this is for homeowners, which is interesting. So you can look at Canby. Here's Canby down here. This is 6% our cost burden. That's the 30%, okay? And of that 6%, 21% of that's severely cost burden, but still overall, that's low. And then when you get, for renters, you see, here's the single, it goes from 6 to 16%. So renters have a lot harder time affording their housing than at least the existing renters. This is all existing people. And also they have a much higher severe cost burden. So, but still, we're still at that 16%, so we don't meet that for the renters. They base it on renter cost burden. So we're still at only 16% of renters are cost burden, but of those 16%, 33% of those are severely cost burden. So it's interesting. So these are just more of how the breakdown it can be on housing, what percent of the housing, the income of households in Canby from the American Community Survey from 2012 to 2016. We had a pretty big percentage 29% are extremely low or very low income, and we're not really providing them much housing choices. What this doesn't show is that we also don't have we don't meet the needs of the very high end as well. And we don't do too well at the low income level, the 50 to 80%, which we showed that what they could afford earlier. So this is the one that just tells you where we're short. That's complicated enough to make you go cross-eyed. But then we have the capacity. This is what I was talking about. You look at what I didn't describe very well to you, which you had me describe before, was when we look at the buildable land part of this, where we took out all the constraints and we took out steep lands, wetlands, churches.
You did take out wetlands.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
like
and most of our-
My
We
question was
did.
in Meadow Springs, you did deduct the wetlands
Yes.
out of that? Thank you.
Yes, yeah, I did. We have a little wetlands inventory. I use that. Plus, we own a lot of the existing wetlands, so there weren't a whole lot to deduct that weren't city-owned, oddly enough. But yes, we did that. The other thing I didn't explain to the audience, which is kind of a thing that DLCD makes us do, and it drives everybody else kind of crazy, is when the buildable lands analysis has to include partially vacant. All that means is that if there's a half acre parcel, let's say it's a single family, low density, let's say you have a half acre and a house on it, that's partially vacant, because you could partition that house off and you could still develop the rest of that acreage. And you know, in time that really does happen in Canby. We've seen that, where there's like the Tofty is a great example of that. You know, they kept that house there, and they just keep dividing everything off. Eventually, so in the long term, it's probably true in the long term that most of those larger lots, as pressure for homes increase, a lot of that pressure is going to make people that have that extra land lop that off. And so you have to include that in the available land for future housing. So you have to figure literally you have to identify every parcel that's a half acre with a single family home on it, or medium density, same thing. You just look at something on there, but you have a half acre and you have enough left. You have to calculate how much you have to subtract a quarter acre for the house. You're allowed to say, well, they might keep a quarter acre. That's just arbitrary. They say, well, I'll keep a quarter acre. So we take all the quarter acres out of those parcels, and what's left is that partially vacant number you see here. So I went through every single.
So that doesn't feel optimistic to you?
Excuse me?
Does that feel optimistic to you?
No, not really. I don't think so. I've been here long enough that I've watched the larger lots really go down to
But
be
most of the larger
partitioned.
lots that I'm thinking of, like flag lots, most of those are well over a half acre that have been flagged.
Yeah, we don't.
I think. I guess that's a
Well,
question, really.
maybe half acres.
I don't really know
Maybe the
that.
flag lots. I don't even think too much about.
I think
flag lots.
to me, it looks more like a mother-in-law ADU type of a thing that's going to go on.
Well, I think that's a huge thing that's going to happen, but as far as, that's still, though, going to make that, remove that, you know, it's going to be developed, whether it's an ADU or an attached or whatever it's going to be. Chances are in 20 years, every big person that's sitting on a home on a big lot, when the parents, us boomers, croak, the kids might just decide to divide the lot, sell that off, and they have a nice house. They keep a quarter acre, and then they make money and they pay for the house. I mean, that tends to be what happens over time. Will it happen to every place? Probably not. But it's just a requirement. You have a set of rules and a process that they allow you to use, and you can't draw out of the lines on this stuff. So we went through and used their workbooks, that they give for small cities of what they want you to do and how much you're allowed to subtract and how you come up with the partially vacant. So we used the actual directions from them. And what Eco Northwest uses the same, a lot of this is the same methodology to Eco Northwest because they do most of the housing needs analysis here, and I've worked with them a lot in the past, and I actually worked for them once upon a time. So I'm familiar with it. So, but that's part of this partially vacant, it gets a little confusing when you say, well, we know we don't have that many just vacant acres. Well, you don't, but you have these partially vacant acres out here. So you had to look at each one and say, okay, what's vacant, what's partially vacant, and then you add them up, and that's how much potential land you have in the future to meet the needs of your projected housing. So it's a pretty much formulaic. It's not, that one's not smoke and mirrors. That's just what it is. So we'll follow that, and that's all these numbers. The only funky thing in here was I made a little note on this because commercial acres, that I needed to make an amendment to that. That's the correct number, but I realized that we don't allow dwelling units in our CM. We allow in C1 and C2 because our code nests sometimes. What you can do in that one, you could do in this one, and then you get over here and you can't do any of it. So I forgot that CM. To be honest, I just forgot. I'm so used to us nesting everything. Then I read that and said, wait a minute. So I had to remove, so if I remove that, this commercial availability ends up being like, instead of 19, it'd be 12.61 acres available. And if you remember it in the recommendations, we're talking about allocating some commercial into this Northeast Canby area. So that we have plenty of land if we shift things around a little bit to accommodate what we need, especially with the high density. We say we're 15 acres short, but by the time we look at the Northeast Canby area and you can subtract, we have 2 properties there that are willing to designate them medium and high density. It more than meets our needs for that 20 years. And so that's what we're proposing to do, to solve this in the 20, sometime in the 20 years, you guys are going to have to be looking at a comp plan amendment that says what you're going to do to accommodate probably the future demand for high density. It's just giving you suggestions on how you could solve those issues. Whether you do or not, it's up to you guys. So what I've been talking about is kind of summing up the same thing as redesignate some of that mixed density residential that's in Northeast Canby, and redesignate, oh man, that's like 26 acres. I have to back something out of that too. And then 15 acres to highway commercial. It's like 26 to 30 acres of mixed density. That's where that pond is. That's that area we're talking about. We also said things you can do now. Redesignate the private recreation to low density. That's Willamette Valley Country Club, folks. That's all that one's talking about. That's saying somewhere along the line you need to deal with that gorilla. I don't know how you're going to deal with it. DLCD thinks, and I think it would be great if we could just make it low density residential, come up to some agreement and how that's going to be developed or not be developed. We would like to remove convenience commercial designation because we have nothing in that designation. We never have. So why do we have it? I do not know. And then residential commercial there's a couple of those lots that this doesn't make any sense. I have some pictures of those too we can show you. And then there's 2 tax lots of residential commercial that's down south side of town that we think should just be rezoned to high density because it's right next to the high density. It's in the same little strip and it just makes sense. And it doesn't make sense to have residential commercial down there and all their residential. I don't know where those designations came from, but they seem to be fragments from I don't know what. But they don't make a lot of sense. So a lot of this is like almost housekeeping. The stuff that I think DLCD would like to see the city address would be how we're going to deal with the deficiency of the high density in that 20-year time frame. That's simple for us to deal with if we have those willing property owners, which we do, that would be willing to make their comprehensive plan designation HDR and MDR, then we don't really have an issue with anything. On the policy considerations, I just listed consider in front of all this stuff, so that you don't feel like there's a hammer on you to do this. But I think considering this is a good way to see how you're going to meet things. But all of this is a little bit of a wait and see with the House bills that are 2001 and even 2003. So I guess we have to wait a little bit and see what DLCD is going to make us do. But we'll have all the nuts and bolts. This will be done. All the tables that will be in here, somebody will be able to go and immediately make them all duplexes. And you'll have your updated version of this easily. And this version is already approved by DLCD. They're happy with it. So these are just the maps. This is that. This is the area that I was just talking about redesignating. This is the would be the high density and the medium density. So HDR, which would be the high density, would be this. I think that's actually closer to 26, not 30. And there's this pond that Commissioner Mills was talking about. And then we have two of these property owners on the commercial on 99 are anxious to have this zoned commercial. We would need to talk to the remaining property owners. I think this property owner is probably okay. Just see how they would feel about having this commercial, because it seems to make sense to me that this is commercial in Canby. This is Charlie Burden stuff. If you go along here, it seems like we should have a strip. We should continue our commercial, because we don't have a lot of commercial. So it makes sense to have highway commercial along here. It's right along the highway. It's kind of the best place you could have it. And then right next to that would be the medium and high density, and the rest just stays low density. And I know that the property owners out in this Northeast Canby master plan area were always a little befuddled about the fact that this was zoned mixed density. And as I told you at the workshop, I think that was a mistake. I think we didn't adopt the master plan, but we adopted the zoning with no guidance on really what to do with it. And the property owners out there, when I met with them a few times, they said, why don't we stay with what we know, low, medium, and high density, and tell us where it's going to be. So this is a perfect opportunity that when he passed away, Gwen Schweitzer, and the Manuels purchased this, it like a door opened, and now that solves that, and the rest of it can stay low density, and we can solve our problems with that for providing future stuff. So basically tonight, all we're looking for is we'd like the Planning Commission to, make whatever comments or suggestions you want me to do, but we'd like to have you make a recommendation that council adopts this as a guidance document, not as a comp plan amendment, because anything that you choose to do with this would require future action to actually make something codified. This is a guidance document full of a lot of information. We have a lot of on our recommendations. The big document has the whole toolkit that can give you all kinds of ideas of what other communities do. And then thanks to our administrator, he made it very specific for Canby and what his experience brought to bear on whether he thought it was a doable thing. So I think there's a lot of good information. But it is a guidance document. It isn't in stone. This may happen, it may not happen. It's like you said, maybe it's going to be 2.3%. Maybe it will be 4% in 5 years and 0.9% in 10 years. But maybe we should have a little document out there that says we don't believe the 1.6, and here's what we think it's going to be, and these are the numbers that we're going to need. And we can do that as well. So,
Thank you.
I know, and that document is huge, guys, so I didn't know how much to throw into this thing, but
Well, we have, no, it isn't a public hearing.
We intended to allow people to speak.
not really an official hearing.
Okay, so there you have it.
We'd like to hear what people have to say if they have something.
So, Gina, are you speaking for both of you separately?
Yes.
Are you going to be speaking to each other after this is all done?
Probably not.
She's going yes, you're saying no. I want the entertainment value of this alone. Okay, so Robert Taylor.
Guilty.
Thanks.
Well, good evening. Cell towers and zoning and everything, good grief. I'm Robert Taylor, live at 173 Southwest 6th Avenue in Canby, and this is going to be a little bit different for you than what you've been through tonight. You're familiar with my wife and her dealing with zoning and other issues. I took a different tack and looked at numbers. I have no clue on anything else, but to me, when 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, it's not good, because it undermines the rest of the document. And I took a couple of pages, and the page number for you is page 3, and I copied these, and I'll apologize. It was in pencil, and I did in red, so it will stand out a little better. If you take a look at the population in 2018, 16,800. In 1990, it was 8983. It gives you a number of 7817 for the population increase in that period of time. But if you look up at the top of the page where I drew my arrow up the side, the number that was in the document is 7677, which is 100 plus error, just in the simple calculation. And it's the simple calculations that are going to get you in trouble in the long term. And one of these in the document on adding will show you how that can come about very quickly. So what I did is took a look, and the top line going across the 28-year span, if you have 7,817 divided by the 28 years, you have a population increase of 279 a year. If you take the 76-77 historic increase, it's 274 people per year. 6 people is no big deal in Canby, I'm sure, because we grow more quickly than that anyway each year. But it's just an indication that numbers aren't always facts. There are facts and there's factoids, and you probably know the difference. A fact is something that can be proven and shown. A factoid is something that is believed and over time becomes old wives' tale or a fact. And the problem is when you have 2 different answers for the same equation, something is wrong. And I'm not saying that either of these is that big a deal on this. But the future forecast, which I kind of separated by a little line because I didn't do my red ink as cleanly as the pencil. The future forecast, and if you use page 53, which says we have 340 people increase per year over the next 20 years from 2019 to 2039, gives an increase of 6,800 additional people during that period of time. If you go to the next page, you'll see where these figures came from, where I lined them up at the top here. 18,546 people were present in Canby in 2019. Well, 2019 is not over yet, so that's maybe a projection or maybe it's a guess. Or See, the problem is when you have assumptions and you have trends and you have predictions, you need to outline what the assumptions, predictions, and trends are so you know how to read what they're saying. And I don't disagree. By 2039, we probably will have the number of 25,349 people in Canby. Maybe not, and we've just heard that here by how we're going to grow over that period of time. So if you go down to the bottom of the page, depends how you use the growth over time. Is either 279 per year or 1,746 per year, but that's because 2018 figures were given in this document and 2019 figures were given in this document, and the difference is 1,746 people extra per year. So it's just, I'm just pointing out that things aren't always what they seem. Let's go back to the page 54, and if you take a look at the line where the first little two pluses are on here, for single family attached, 8 plus 8 plus 148 is 236. Not true.
Where are you?
It's 164. And this may have been corrected on the slides you saw tonight. I wasn't able to follow along and listen to everything going on. But that means that there's 72 elements missing from that total going across. If you take those out to low-density residential, that's 5.5 per acre. That's 13 acres of your available land. If it's medium density, 8 per acre, that's 9 acres of it. If it's 17 per acre for high density, that's 4 acres. It makes a difference how it gets allocated. And then when we come across to the next page, if you'll take a look at the figures, first of all, let's just go down the right-hand column, percent of total, 63%, 17, 7.9, 17.7, 106.5%. That's optimistic. That's one way of putting it. The actual figures, when they're corrected, if you take the 99.6 acres that was vacant and add it to the 353, you come up with the numbers you have down below for low-density residential of 452. I don't think that's correct. I think it should be 425. And if you take it across to the right, you see that I've just written in quickly 254, 25, and minus 1. Well, first of all, we came up with high-density residential being 13 shy, and now we're only minus 1 shy. So it's a matter of what gets tallied, and I understand that some of these documents can be assembled on Excel, and it's very easy on Excel to total across, total the columns, get them in percent, and you have a quick check to see where the numbers went. Now, I'm not demeaning anything. This is easy to happen, and I've made mistakes myself, okay? Everybody has. But the numbers just keep on coming apart, and it's hard to put great confidence in a document that has these kind of errors scattered through it. I don't know how you feel about it,
Actually,
but
that's not correct.
as a person in the public that picks up a magazine or a book and I read and it's got typographical errors, or it says something is a fact and you happen to know differently that it's not correct, you throw out their baby with the bathwater, right? Everything goes out the window. Okay. The last page is just a re-summary of the previous page because it refers to the exhibits 52 and 51 and how they're used. I think you've done a lot of good work. I know, yes.
Several of these things that you've been talking about, aren't bad. They're been corrected
They've been
in the
corrected?
tables. But a lot of the things that you're talking about, I actually don't even know exactly. I think probably we should sit down and go over them, because I don't even know exactly what the point is of saying how many 276 a year. I'm not talking about the annual people growth. I'm talking about household growth, not people growth. And so I don't know why you're saying 279 increase a year. So what? I don't know
Well,
what the point of that,
the
because I
number
didn't
is-
say we were increasing by X number of people per year. I was talking how many households we're increasing. And the 6803 comes directly from PSU, as does the 16,800. We're using numbers that were set forth by the people.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah,
what you're-
and so I
understand
didn't
what
even
you're-
know why the 279 is even relevant for what. I don't know what's that relevant for.
I'm a person in the public.
Right, I'm asking why.
And I don't understand all the terms you use, but when you put them into a form that's for public dissemination and for public comment to say yay or nay on,
I'm trying to figure out what the 279 increase, what is that issue? Because I never talk about the increase, annual increase for population
you're
as
talking
per
about,
year.
you're talking about 2.6 or 2.
That's annual
hold
average
it.
growth rate.
Okay, you're
This
talking,
is a planning session, so let's,
I would be happy to sit down and
I
go
would
over every
suggest you
single
guys
thing.
get over to Gwen's coffee shop and
Yeah,
fist it out.
I would be happy to do that,
You know,
because I think a lot of this is maybe a misunderstanding, and some of these numbers, they never will equal 100, because you round things up, round things down, and then these figures, I would gladly go over. I have Excel spreadsheets showing you how I got every one of these figures. And these tables down below, where on Exhibit 52, I can show you the
Again,
documents. So
again.
I have a lot of documentation of this, so.
And that's fabulous. My suggestion is that, take it outside.
Yeah, I would just want, to
because
say that there's a lot of
that's-
documentation on Excel and everything else with these figures.
That's,
as I said, it was my opinion and how I interpreted what I read.
Okay,
Right.
well, any questions?
It's like
Okay.
apples and oranges.
Gina, you want your shot at this? Okay.
I don't do numbers. Oops, forgot to hand out my stuff.
I want to thank you, Robert and Gina. I am in the paper business, so the more paper you use, the better I feel.
Oh, you would like
Keep going with that. So, thank you.
Okay, so I have a handout. Mine's not numbers.
I like
He likes numbers. So I'm Regina Taylor with the 173 Southwest 6th Avenue in Canby. And my handout's coming around. So I was at the work session on August 6th and really appreciate your commentary that night for the housing need report. It was very refreshing to hear you indicate, Matilda, to indicate she was able to use this project to demonstrate for her planning department coworkers the process of assembling and interpreting all this data. Kudos to her for handing over the baton so efficiently prior to retirement, all that knowledge that you passed on. Matilda also stated this report is a state requirement for cities with a population of 25,000 or more. She talked about this tonight, too. And since her population projections indicate that Canby will have only about 23,603 residents in the next 20 years, I don't see a rush to submit this report to the state. And she also kind of said that tonight. But again, what a fantastic tool to measure our progress in meeting the housing goals. It's wonderful. I found it encouraging to see how well Canby's doing. Question 4 of the housing needs analysis flowchart on page 5 was especially thrilling. There were 2 questions on that flowchart that said, is needed density the same as or less than actual density, and is needed sites the same as actual sites? And if answering yes to both, no measures for needed housing are required. On report page 16, by rounding of the numbers in that chart that I have there in the middle of the page, in the diagram.
Numbers, you said down numbers.
Yeah, I don't have very many, a few numbers. We can see the comp plan needed density has been lower than or equal to the average annual actual density. This is through 2018. And after applying the necessary updates to Exhibit 52, we find we meet the goals for needed inventory of low and medium density and are only lacking about 1% of our goal of high density demand. Notice the text of the report, and this is on Exhibit 52, advises 99.66 acres of mixed density residential should be reallocated, with 72.66 acres should go to low density, 15 acres to medium density, and 12 to high density. But those numbers weren't updated on Exhibit 52, so that Exhibit 52 is not correct. It still shows the entire 99.66 acres are included in low density, so the data for all three zones are incorrect. 27 acres needs to be removed from low density, 15 acres added to medium density, and 12 acres added to high density. The reallocation of the 99.66 acres has been or will be fully explained by Bob, and it was. Next page. The wetland delineation needed. And if we look at the map that I put there on page 2, that's the same one from her report. We can see that pond right there in the middle, and she said that she did remove that from the wetland report. I wonder about that, because I contacted Anita Huffman, which is our wetland coordinator down in Salem for Clackamas County, and she could not verify that that area had been delineated so that we actually know how much of that area can't be touched. It's not required to have a delineation to remove the wetlands from that. That's just if you want to build on it, they require delineation. Correct. We can take the actual area of that pond and remove it, which I did. So how much did you take out under?
I don't know if I have that with me, but I have all those tables. I can share it with you. But yeah, the pond is.
It does. I was curiosity, but it doesn't really matter, honestly. My recommendation here, and good work on that, by the way, because only the owners can delineate, the city can't. I would just recommend that we work with those landowners, maybe even financially assist them to try to get the delineation report done, because I think that's going to be a really, really important area for our growth out that way. And that's my only comment there on the wetland delineations. Boy, I'd love to help them get that done.
On that Gwen Schweitzer's pond, they're planning on preserving that.
Yeah, they have to by state and federal law.
But they're fully aware of it. We've had the conversation, and and it has been removed from the.
It would be nice to know how much
acreages.
of that is not going to be available for us to use, but that's my only comment on
I have
wetland
that. I can give you
delineation. And then a recommendation, because of some painful issues I had on the very first Planning Commission meeting I ever came to, I would like to see us add the reasoning to Appendix A, where we recommend removing the residential commercial designation from some of the lands in Canby, because I know some people have actually looked at the comp plan and made purchases of property thinking that they were going to be able to rezone those properties and make a financial reward. Why doesn't, I mean, that's why you invest money. And if we remove that from their toolkit after they've already purchased the land, that could become controversial in the future. So I think if we add the reasoning we're doing that, it'll help us out in the future.
Okay.
So good thing on wetland, good thing on the rezoning of that, but I'd like to see the reasoning put in there. And then the rest, and again, really good work on this. I think you did a wonderful job. I have a couple little typos and things that you might want to fix. It always helps to have somebody else's eyes on it, because if you read your own work, your mind adds the words that you don't see. So on page 8 and 9 of the report, it just says, hey, there's a map on the next page, but you go to the next page and it says, insert map here. just change the words and say, hey, it's an Appendix E. You're done.
Well, because it's going to be in this when it goes to the printer. If it goes to the printer, it will
Well,
be inserted there with the full out.
Timeout.
This is a workshop for discussing this, and
Excellent.
So if you have typos,
You're good.
spellings,
They're
things
all
like
good.
that,
We're good
you
then.
guys get
You got it in
together.
writing. You can do it. Cool deal. And I really appreciate your hard work. Good
Gina,
work.
thank you. Bob, thank you very much.
Good job.
We really appreciate your input. So, Matilda, what is your expectation that we do with this document tonight?
Just make a recommendation that the council look at it for adoption as a guidance document. That's all.
Okay, so does anybody have an opinion on, Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that? I started with Andre the last time. You're at the other end, buddy.
That's fine. I guess I'm a little iffy on it, on making the recommendation yet. I guess I'd like to see the final document redlined.
Okay, Derek?
Yeah, I'm willing to move forward as far as a recommendation with the corrected changes to the city council. After being at the work session, I think you made the modifications that they were worried about. And again, this is a document that is kind of a guidance tool and can be changed. It's nothing that's set in stone or
Yeah, it's
law
not
or rule or
any
code.
kind of a comp plan amendment. It's just suggestions for
Yeah.
how to move forward.
So I would like to see in our recommendation that you fix or look at that math before you give the final to the city council.
I agree on fixing any math or typos. And also, I would like to see that 2.3%
Okay.
extension. I think that'd be very
Okay.
helpful for you, for each
That's why I'd
planning.
like to see a marker.
Yeah, that would be.
Andre?
Thank you, Matilda, for presenting a draft report. Obviously, in any draft, there's always some things that need to be fixed up, so. Yeah, I think it would be good to include the 2.3% in addition to the 1.6, just to have both of them on the record.
Ryan?
Yeah, I think it's fine. Get the final draft and push it forward.
Okay with it.
As I stated in the planning session, or the work session, I find it odd that we are looking at this housing assessment needs without looking at the bigger picture of traffic, infrastructure, all the other things that go into that. And I think we can move forward again with the 2.3%, but I find it it's very difficult for me to think that this has any relevance to the overall growth of what the citizens of Canby are looking at, particularly from the traffic end of it. I mean, you have to look at the overall picture, not just the housing part of it. And that's I don't know how you get around that. I mean, we have housing assessment, but where is the traffic portion of this traffic assessment, so that we can say, oh, we go ahead with this, what is the impact on our roads? How is that going to impact 99 and Territorial, the only ways in and out of Canby, truthfully?
That would be through the transportation system plan
Yeah.
update.
Yeah, but,
Which
yeah,
looks at the
another
same thing.
standalone document that they won't take this into account.
They'll take the population projections into account for the transportation system plan update. We did the last time we updated it. They go by population projections to full build out within your urban growth boundary, and they see if when they do the transportation system plan, they take every zone and max it out. And then they say, let's pretend in 20 years, the entire UGB is going to be maxed out at the maximum development that can happen based on the zoning. And then they run a model that says how that's going to generate traffic, which is what we did the last time we updated that. And then they run the model and say, if it is at full build out, here's the improvements you're going to have to do, and that's what the TSP is based on. So the TSP was based on full build out. That's if the maximum can happen in our urban growth boundary, and then they make recommendations on the transportation system plan to accommodate that maximum growth.
So
And
what
we
you're-
have that document.
So what you're maybe telling me is that the last time we went through this exercise.
For the
they-
TSP?
Yeah, they projected the traffic
For 20 years.
mess that we have today.
For 20 years.
So I just wanted to be clear that,
That's true.
that they were going, you're going to have a traffic mess in
And-
20 years that you have now. but
And they
we
tell
didn't do
us
it. But
what
we didn't do
we
anything
need
about
to
it.
do to mitigate that. And the city chooses to do something or not do something.
Apparently they chose not to
I
do
mean,
anything.
That's, the documents can't make you do it, but they say what you need to do to, if at full build out, this is what you're going to have to do to make things function. And their idea of functioning, by the way, maybe isn't our idea of functioning, an F to them.
Level of
Maybe a
service.
C to them, but it's an F to us,
The other thing in the mix is it's, that 99 is a state highway, it's not
Yeah.
a city.
And we have to meet mobility standards there, and that was a big issue,
Well, we
so.
just added 1,200 car trips a day with the Shakespeare project. So I'm kind of curious as to
And
how.
Auto Road was in the transportation system plan to address that very issue. Auto Road connection to 99 from the industrial area was in the transportation system plan specifically to address the future growth of our industrial area.
Okay.
I believe the other master plans for water, stormwater, and wastewater are similar in nature, where they consider all the buildable lands and max them out, see where the weak points are in the city system, and have a capital improvement plan that states what's priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, and that what needs to be done and how much it's going to cost
So my
over a
understanding is
20-year
that
period.
each of these reports is a different piece of the pie that the city uses for planning moving forward.
Yes.
So if we were to combine them all into one report, it would be unwieldy. So we have the multiple
Yeah, I
reports
don't
to
know.
go through.
Be a monster document. But, truly, you need to kind of look at them as just, these documents are like to give you a heads up and to start thinking where you need to be thinking about things that are coming down the pipe. They don't solve all your problems. They give you suggestions about what might be coming down and how you might be able to address them. They're not the solution to everything.
But Mr. Chairman's comment about the linkage between transportation planning and housing planning is irrefutable. And I'd suggest that, one of the things that we could consider is how we're linked to transportation planning in the city. And perhaps there should be some kind of linkage where we're part of that process, or one of us or more of us is involved in that process. Also, to try to improve the communication and coordination between the two planning activities, because they affect each other greatly.
Yeah, I'd like to see I'd like to see, based upon your report and growth projections, I'd like to see a map. How are they going to solve the transportation issue?
That's what the TSP does.
Well, I know, but apparently,
I mean,
the last time around, it's a mess. It's a mess today. And, so if you're going to, I'd like to know what kind of mess it's going to look like in 20 years. I think that's fair for the citizens of Canby to go, okay, if we're going to increase our population by X, what the effect of that is going to be on getting from one end of Canby to the other, given, again, that only 99 and Territorial are the major wide streets. So, and one of them is the state. We can't do anything about that.
And they did have a lot of public meetings with the model showing exactly where the traffic blowups were going to be in the future at full build-out. The difficulty is the solutions people don't like often. And so then you get kind of caught, like, which one do you do or not do? And, and sometimes they're very expensive to make those solutions happen. So then it becomes very difficult. Like Auto Road will solve a lot of problems, but it's really expensive.
Well, building the housing, doing the housing piece of it is probably the least expensive. Doing as you say, doing the transportation.
Yeah, transportation's really
piece is
tough.
going to be very expensive, but you can't, you're putting all of these folks, I can use a cruder term, but you're putting all of these folks in a 5-pound coffee can, 10 pounds of people into a 5-pound coffee can and expecting it to work. And I've thought about it for the last 2-3 years. I don't see how you do that. I'd love to see, love to see somebody come in and say, this is how it's going to work. We put this many people in Canby, these new residents, and this is what the traffic flow is going to look like. That's all I'm asking.
That's
And
what
I
the
think it's reasonable.
transportation system plan does. Exactly what you're saying is exactly what they do. Exactly.
So it sounds like what you're requesting is a joint work session between
I see.
all of the groups, just to be able to see across the board what's going on and have a better
I wish we had
understanding.
the consultants that did that, that could come back and replay that for everybody, because it was, and one of the most controversial things we got us pretty much pitchforked was their initial solution to the whole problem, which would have solved all the problems on 99, was the one-way traffic downtown, and people lost their marbles over that one. So they had to go back with some fallback solutions, which they did, but they didn't completely solve the problems. So, but all the solutions are laid out, and they're laid out on that 20-year horizon with maximum build-out of residential and commercial and industrial, and they ran the little cars and showed where it was going to be a big problem. I still have copies of it, but it needs to be updated. It was from 2010, we adopted it in 2011, but it was still for full build-out, as if every square inch of our property within the urban growth boundary was built to its maximum development. And they ran the bottlenecks, and I have every printout of that shows every single bottleneck. And then after all the public meetings and stuff, what we ended up doing for the major.
And what year was this?
2010 was when it was done, and it was adopted in 2011. It was done by DKS and Associates, and it was about a year-long process, and they went all over town, and we had meeting after meeting after meeting, and but the solutions, were like the Auto Road thing. That's just a monster project, and it's complicated because some of it's in the county, some of it's in the city, some of it's, where do you get funds? It's been and we've been trying all along to get the thing funded. So it's just it's a big thing. And, we have improvements that are supposed to be done at Pine to improve that. That's complicated because the railroad doesn't always go along real well when we want to go walking on the roads around the railroad. And then we have, one of the solutions was to put an extra lane in 99. And, it goes on and on. But the solutions, were out there, and it showed where they needed to come up. And we couldn't get it adopted until we adopted solutions that showed that it would function. But what I know was the glaring thing was that their idea of acceptable level is, I think, different than what we perceive traffic here in Canby. C to them might be an F to us. Do you know what I mean? And they don't go crazy until it hits like D or something. And I think that we're not used to any kind of terrible bottleneck here unless the train's going by in the wrong time of day. But I think they did a bang-up job, but it was tough, and the solutions were not really simple.
Well, they're not going to get any less simple.
But they really did look at the entire UGB being built out and to come up with solutions to handle the maximum development. That's what they do. So they do consider the housing in the sense that they know how many dwellings are going to be there and what that would generate for traffic. And then they ran those little, look like bugs, but they little cars, and they did a model specific to Canby. We got a grant to do that, and we had them build their own special model for Canby, because before we had to use Metroscope, and Metroscope is never as accurate for Canby because we're kind of outside their area, so they just kind of shoehorn us in. So they developed a model just for Canby, so it would be more accurate, so we'd have better numbers to run. So we ran all those numbers, and the solutions are there. It's just they aren't easy.
And I believe the city's implementing some of these developer-driven transportation improvements on a case-by-case basis
Yep.
as development
That's
occurs.
right.
And then SDC fees are being collected for transportation to kind of collect to pay for some of these bigger improvements.
Yep. Just
as
takes
we through
time. It takes time, and takes, a development to come in to really kind of leverage it. And then our complications are truly, some of the solutions are outside the current city limits. So then you have other agencies that have to get involved. Then you have ODOT that has to get involved. Then you have the railroad. Let me tell you, that's like the perfect storm of trying to get things done, to get everybody to agree to a project with the railroad and ODOT and the county and the city.
And the train's on cue.
You know?
Did you plan it that
I
way?
mean, really, I agree with everything you're saying, but there has been a lot of effort to try to figure the very concerns that you have. They're just have a lot of warts, and they're really difficult to come up with financing.
I don't know, I can't put my finger on it, but it feels like we're putting the cart before the horse here. And because I think that until you solve the transportation issue, you can keep pouring people in it. Once they start tolling the I-5 and 205, it's going to put more pressure on traffic.
I can tell you that DLCD is going to make us do this document next
Right.
year. Period.
This document doesn't invite people in. This document gives you something
Some
to
tools
think
to look
about,
at it,
tools
that's all.
of what we are likely to expect, and that we have very little control over stopping.
And it may be that people come out here and drive away around and say there's too much traffic, and then they don't move here. And then it doesn't make a difference.
I have no words for that.
Boy, I'm glad I didn't say that.
So Chair Savory, can I add a couple things?
Sure.
We do need your final decision on this document tonight.
What am I gonna
And I
do?
want to plead with you and ask the commission, some of you that would like to see the revised document, can we prepare that for the council and send it to you? Because we're going to lose the services of Matilda here very quickly, and the document will never get done. So if that's your goal, it probably won't ever get done if she leaves and isn't able to finish it. So we need to keep on a schedule, is what I'm saying.
I thought she wasn't allowed to leave till I was done.
Unfortunately, that isn't quite
I have no problem with the document in and of itself. I just think that it's, operating in somewhat of a
Yeah, I
vacuum.
understand. But we also want some of you
We
to
have to
see
agree
the
with
changes that she's going to make too. But she can make those and still distribute them to
Exactly
you,
what
but we
I'm
can't
making.
hold another meeting and still get to the council in time.
Brian,
So
I'd
could
be
we-
good with that.
Could I make sure I understand what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yep.
So like, I think I'm supposed to run a 2.3% growth thing to show how many houses, how much land we're going to need, right? What's the projected people, dwelling units, and land in that scenario, right? Would that
Yeah.
make people happy for that one?
And fix
I
any
think that's our
typos.
most realistic case as opposed to the political case that's being handed us
Right.
by DLCD.
Yeah.
Check them out.
I might word that slightly differently, but I think.
Yeah, of course.
But I get the drift. I think I can do that.
Okay.
And I'd be happy to meet with these people too and go over all
Sure.
the questions they had. I think there's just a little bit of misunderstanding with some of that.
Okay,
But-
so first we'll take care of the DR 1901, the monopole. Since we turned that down, do we have to reaffirm that?
Do we need
No,
to
you've
motion?
already-
I didn't think so.
You already
That's
did
done.
that, remember?
So then I will entertain a motion to encourage the adoption, is that the proper term, of the
recommendation to the city
recommendation
council.
of the housing assessment.
So moved.
Second.
Well, I think we need to have phrasing in there with the 2.3, so.
Oh, yeah.
I move that the Planning Commission approve the City of Canby Housing Needs Analysis as a guidance document with the corrections to any spelling and math errors and with a 2.3% extension on the possible growth, and recommend staff present it to the City Council for approval and adoption.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Hey, thank you, people.
Thanks.
Okay, so, items of interest from the planning staff. Monday, September 9th, it's been canceled? Is that correct?
Yes, that's what we would like to do, since there aren't any land use cases, and we're up to here still handling stuff to be able to get anything else on an agenda to you.
Okay.
And I'm on vacation.
Well, in that case, stop the world, Lane, once you
Got
get
a
off.
party in that case.
Any items of interest from us to the plans?
There's also an update on the minor partition, Brian.
Yeah, I do. Let me see if I can find it now. Here it is. Oh. So Sandy, who had presented that case to you at your last meeting, met with the property owners and shared the alternative for that partition, where they would make the rear lot smaller by shortening the driveway length to just 100 feet, so they could take advantage of a 12-foot wide drive instead of 20-foot. And they chose to do that, and that's going to allow them to keep their carport intact without having to remove that. That will result with the larger parcel in the back.
Yeah.
And a shorter driveway, 100-foot maximum length, and a 12-foot driveway access.
And did they just decide to move a straight line all the way across because he had talked about angling it? Did that?
That I
Just
don't
as a straight
know.
line.
Should mention that, whether they were changing that. I know the fire department always has some concerns about the narrower driveways, but then I believe they mentioned something about already wanting it to be fire sprinkled at that meeting.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We adjourned.